What are we starting with today?
Ooh.
Patreon something.
Spotify update.
Jamp has got it right this time.
Something to do with the Patreons.
They want to thank our patrons.
Yeah,
Ah,
Lovely
yeah.
little patrons. They suggested this
Yeah.
episode this week.
of course.
They did, yeah. They voted for it on Patreon, and now we're doing that vote because we believe in democracy. Don't we?
Absolutely.
Cool, great. So I'm going to ask everyone a question. You don't need to answer. Did you have an imaginary friend growing up?
No.
Answer that question, please. Let us know in the comments.
Start the show.
Let's start the show.
Start the show. Hello and welcome to SCI Guys, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird, and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey, and as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Jamp and Luke Cutforth.
Good evening.
Hello there.
Today, we're going down a rabbit hole.
Oh, it's quite rude.
Not literally. What?
We should ask the rabbit first.
Yeah, man. I'm with you. Animal rights.
Please ask permission. Don't break in.
So,
How would you feel if a rabbit just entered your house?
I mean,
Kicked the door down.
Actually, I'd be-
I don't think it
Rabbit feet.
could kick the door down. They're
They've
very
got-
small.
They've got big feet.
Rabbits have big kicks, man.
Proportional to their size, sure, but a rabbit kit couldn't take down a door. If you'd like to see us
Depends
try
how
and
strong the
test whether
door
a
is.
rabbit kit can take down a door, let us know in the comments. Honestly, I feel like if we had the budget, a lot of our time would be spent just doing things like that.
Getting
Yeah.
rabbits to kick down doors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like Mythbusters, but silly.
Yes.
Do you want to know what we're talking about today?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Is it rabbits kicking down doors?
It's not that at all.
Damn it.
But we can maybe think about it. At
Is
some
it
point.
conspiracy theories?
It's not conspiracy theories.
Is it Alice in Wonderland?
It's not Alice in
Is
the-
it Jeffrey Bezos going to space?
That's literally no. That's
No,
the exact
okay.
opposite of going down a rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah, it's going
'Cause
up.
it's a human going into the earth, and
Yeah.
Jeffrey Bezos going into space is a monster.
Instead of going down into
I'll stop calling him a monster when he stops world hunger. Okay, that's the deal. As soon as he does that, I'll start being nice.
I think that's a fair deal.
I think so too. No, so today we're talking about maladaptive daydreaming. You guys might have heard me talking about this a little bit before.
Ah.
Yeah, so we've got it suggested by our patrons. If you want to do that, if you want to suggest episode topics and vote on them, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/SciGuys. Every single month, we do an episode like this where we just do whatever you guys tell us to.
I've seen a lot of comments about this
Yeah, we've been getting it for
for
a while.
this specific episode.
We've been getting it for a while.
Yeah.
And look, I'm going to be honest. You could probably see by the timestamp, but it's going to be a long episode, I think. Very good chance of this being a very long episode.
Whoa, that's a long time.
time code.
Whoa, mamma mia. If you're listening to the podcast, then we're looking down at the YouTube play bar.
We can't even see
Ooh.
the red bar yet. That's crazy.
So, what is maladaptive daydreaming? Let's start off. What is maladaptive daydreaming? Do you guys know?
No.
Is it daydreaming, but extreme to the point where it affects your life?
Yeah. You
Oh,
know what the word
yeah.
maladaptive means, don't you?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so maladaptive daydreaming, it's excessive fantasy activity that replaces human interaction and/or interferes with academic, interpersonal, or vocational functioning. Now, that is a direct quote that'll come up later. Okay? So essentially what that means is, yeah, it's excessive daydreaming. Daydreaming to the point where you replace other things in your life. You replace social interaction. You replace, I don't know, going down the pub with some mates, all that sort of stuff. You daydream instead. So it can also present with repetitive actions like pacing or sort of tapping, rhythmic motions like that. And some people can spend an average of 4 hours per day, and that was from one small study that was based on self-reporting. So don't take that 4 hours a day as a hard and fast rule. I've just read that you can spend 4 hours a day. I've read 56% of your day, of your sort of waking hours. But again, a lot of these are taken from self-reported studies. So we'll get to that in a bit, okay? So in terms of treatment, so we'd usually do these episodes, right? When it comes to something like this, we've done it on bipolar disorder. We've done it on what other episodes have we done on sort of mental disorders?
PTSD.
We've done
you
lots of
might hear
different
that.
things, right?
We've
So-
done that, yeah.
You might have thought a bit of a structure, right? I usually tell you a little bit of background about it. I tell you about the symptoms. I tell you, more about the sort of the thing itself. Then I talk about treatment, and then we talk a little bit more about other stuff, right? I'm getting right into the treatment now,
Okay.
Oh,
and you'll see
skipping
why.
straight there. All right.
Yeah, you'll see why soon. So the thing is, there's no single drug that's been shown to work for it. But some, I think, antidepressants or drugs that can be used for OCD can help people. Therapy can help people. I've seen people come up with different sort of methods of helping themselves sort of get stuck in daydreams less by saying, okay, I'm only going to daydream between this hour and that hour, avoiding triggers for daydreaming. Like if you find you daydream in your bed a lot, then avoid spend less time in your bed. If you daydream when you watch a fantasy show, then don't watch that fantasy show, watch something else. I've seen different people talk about these different things, okay? And that is basically all you can say for treatment, really, because, well, I mean, it'll make more sense in a second, because I want to tell you about the rabbit hole. So this is the rabbit hole I went down, and I'm going to take you two down with me, kicking and screaming.
Oh God.
Ah.
Ow!
Hey.
Did you
Kicks
kick
me
him
in the
too?
he kicks me in the shin. Like hard. You're wearing shoes.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm barefoot.
I didn't even feel
Kick,
yours.
kick Corey
Oh,
then.
really?
Yeah,
That's
go
why
on.
I
You can give me a
barefoot.
little kick. That was much
There you
nicer.
go, there you go.
Much gentler
And now
kick.
scream.
Nice.
Ah! There you go. Okay, we're ready.
Fantastic. So I tried to find out where it came from. Right. So when I do these episodes, what I usually do is I'll have a look into the disorder. I'll see what's going on with it. I'll look in my psychopathology book. You know, I'll first start off by maybe going to PubMed and Google Scholar and seeing, well, what's the general idea? What's going on there? So I went to PubMed, which is a database of journals, of scientific papers related to sort of biology, living things, that whole general area. Life sciences, really. There were 60 results on PubMed for maladaptive daydreaming, which is comparatively not many.
I was going to say, it's not a lot, is it?
Yeah, you can get hundreds, thousands of results
Yeah.
on other topics. I mean, 60 results is ridiculously small. That means that there are 60 results in this database where I find most of the papers that I use. There are only 60 papers. And those are just papers that mention, that have the terms maladaptive or daydream in them, not necessarily ones that are about maladaptive daydreaming. So that was interesting to me. So there were only 14 before the year 2000, which was very interesting. So that means it's a very new thing. And I suspect that those, and I say I suspect, I was correct in saying that those 14 aren't necessarily about maladaptive daydreaming that we're talking about today. They just use the term maladaptive daydreaming. 35, over half of them have been since 2015. So over
Wow.
half of the papers on this database on maladaptive daydreaming have been published in the past 6 years.
That's a positive trend.
It is a positive trend, but that it is an interesting look at it. So if we go into Google Scholar, there's only 300 hits on Google Scholar, 4 before 2000 and 231 after 2015.
And that's just where they say at some point maladaptive daydreaming.
Yeah, talking about maladaptive.
Not necessarily a paper about maladaptive daydreaming.
Not necessarily.
Could be a paper about tapping. And then tapping is also found in patients with maladaptive daydreaming. And that
Sure.
would come up as a hit.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it might. It might have to be in the title, but again, no, it doesn't have to be in the title necessarily. No, it just has maladaptive daydreaming somewhere in it, right?
Well, woefully low number of mentions then.
Yes, and a painfully low number of studies on it. Yeah, not mentioned very much, and not very many studies done specifically on it. It is difficult to find information on this. So, like I said, I'll look on PubMed, I'll look on Google Scholar. I'll also start by having a little look at Wikipedia. I like having a look at Wikipedia. Now, I wouldn't say get your information from Wikipedia. If you're in school or in university, your teacher will probably be telling you, or your lecturer will probably be telling you, what are you doing using Wikipedia as a source? Wikipedia isn't a source. But I go to Wikipedia because it's very good to get an overview on a topic, to see what the general consensus is. And also, Wikipedia tends to have really good sources on it, right? Got great sources. If you want to start finding information on a topic, go to Wikipedia and look what they've referenced. So you can start from there. So, I went to Wikipedia, I had a look, and at the top of the Wikipedia page, I saw the things you never want to see at the top of a Wikipedia page. This article has multiple issues. And I'll list the bullet points, because when an article has issues on Wikipedia, they tell you exactly what the issues are. Like, for example, if you've got a really short article, it'll say, oh, this is a stub. It's not got very much, and to be honest, it'll probably be deleted because there's not enough information on it. This one was not a stub. This one was... It was a fairly sort of like full Wikipedia page, but it seemed kind of sparse. It wasn't say what you'd find on bipolar disorder. It wasn't what you'd find on even say diarrhea, right? It was looking a little bit thin, but it wasn't a stub. So What it says on Wikipedia is that it provides insufficient context for those unfamiliar with the subject. That was in July 2020. The neutrality of this article is disputed. That was also in July 2020. This article relies too much on references to primary sources, which is July 2020. This article may lend undue weight to certain ideas, incidents, or controversies, July 2020. And this article needs additional citations for verification, December 2020.
Some Wikipedia editor was having a party in July 2020.
Yeah.
An angry anti-maladaptive daydreaming article writing party.
Got really angry at this study.
Well, I feel like you guys are on... I feel like we've got different views on this.
Oh, no. I'm very glad that they're being, scrutinizing the writing. But yeah, it's just funny that it was all exactly the same time.
Oh, yeah. To be fair, and it makes sense because when you look at the Wikipedia page, it does have some information on it, but it does feel quite biased. Right? It does feel like quite a biased Wikipedia page. And you know what? In fact, I could probably get the Wikipedia page up for you right now. We can have a little read from it. Would you guys like to have a little read from a
I would
Wikipedia
love to.
page?
What's wrong with it? Is it like it's like pop psychology, or is it like it's like what's when you say it's biased?
I think it's best for me to read it,
Okay.
and then we'll get to it. And then we'll get to
Maladaptive
it.
daydreaming is the worst thing ever.
I mean, we'll get to it. We'll get to it later. Okay. So, for example, the opening couple sentences, right? Maladaptive daydreaming, also called excessive daydreaming, is a proposed diagnosis of a disordered form of dissociative absorption associated with excessive fantasy that is not recognized by any major medical or psychological criteria. It can result in distress, can replace human interaction, and may interfere with normal functioning, such as social life or work. Unreliable medical source is the first source for that. It's an unreliable medical source. So starting off, it is a little bit like on the Wikipedia page, right? If I'm looking at this, I'm like, not sure how much I trust this.
That's interesting because that almost sounds like the writer there is suggesting, or at least hinting at the possibility that this is not a real thing.
Well, the way that I read this is that it is the reason it's got a Wikipedia page and it's being presented as information that is factual. So in this case, it's saying maladaptive daydreaming is this that is unrecognized, which implies that it is a disorder, right?
A disorder that medicine hasn't caught up with yet.
Yeah. But it implies that it is. Okay. It implies that what is being said is true. It is just as yet unrecognized by medical professionals.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And just starting off the article like that is a little bit. It's. If you don't have the medical sources to back it up, then it's a bit. I think it could be a bit misleading to say it is this, even if you're saying it's unrecognized.
It's like a double negative.
Exactly, right? Because what you're doing is you're saying, yeah, this is unrecognized, but you're also at the same time saying, but it is a thing. You know?
Yeah.
Right? You're having your cake and eating it too.
You're both sidesing. You're both sidesing the maladaptive daydreaming argument.
So that is the opening of the Maladaptive Daydreaming Wikipedia page, and it's got it talks about research, diagnosis on there, and maladaptive daydreaming in media. It's got a few different sort of headings to it, but again, I say it's a Wikipedia page. It's basically a page long, in terms of like actual content.
Right.
And so that was a bit worrying to me. I thought, oh, that's strange. Usually, I've got a fair amount of information to go off of. You know, even on quite niche things. Like, for example, we talk about what was it we had with Dodie? Dissociative
DID.
Yeah, DID. No, not DID.
DPRD.
DPRD. Yeah. When we spoke about that's a very sort of, that's a condition where there's not very much known about it. It's kind of it's in its infancy in terms of studies, but I still was able to find quite a bit of reliable information on it. With this, I wasn't really able to. So that was the first sort of like, oh, okay, all right, what's going on here? So I looked into it some more. I found that there were some articles written on it, and in fact, on the Wikipedia page, it will tell you that in the section of maladaptive daydreaming in media, it'll tell you that there's some articles written on it. I had to look at some articles. So the BBC wrote an article, The Atlantic, a bunch of different places like that. So the BBC article was from the 5th of October, 2017. The title was The Daydream That Never Stops. Tagline was, when does living in a fantasy world become a problem? And the opening line, one day when she was 5 years old, Dea Barge told her brother she didn't want to play with him anymore. she wanted to play with her imagination. And it goes on to basically, it goes on to give some decent information about sort of where maladaptive daydreaming came from. And mostly it's kind of a case study on this one person. I say a case study, it's an interview with this one person and their experiences with maladaptive daydreaming, which is it kind of sets a trend for the rest of these articles, right? That is what we're going to be seeing. Generally, they are, it is a view of maladaptive daydreaming through the lens of this one person who talks about their experiences. And interestingly, in this article, this person wasn't officially diagnosed with maladaptive daydreaming, because realistically, you can't be officially diagnosed with it because it's not an official disorder. But they were self-diagnosed. They were self-diagnosed with this. Research Digest, June 25th, 2018. The title was "People with Maladaptive Daydreaming Spend an Average of 4 hours a day lost in their imagination." It discusses a study done in 2018, and as of November 2020, it was one of their most popular articles. So that was literally written at the bottom of the article. Hey, you guys really like this one? We've done a podcast episode on it, essentially, and it talks about a study on, I think, 77 people who had self-diagnosed with maladaptive daydreaming, and it was self-reported, and that's where the 4 hours a day comes from. That's where that 4 hours a day number comes from. So they gave details about any mental health issues that they had. So 21 of them had been diagnosed with depression, 14 with anxiety, 5 with OCD, and there were some other disorders there as well. And they basically did a bunch of questionnaires for 2 weeks before going to bed, talking about levels of dissociation, obsessive compulsive symptoms, depression, general anxiety, social anxiety, and emotion, and also maladaptive daydreaming. And this is just an example of the question was, I felt the need or urge to continue a daydream that was interrupted by a real world event at a later point. That was one of the questions, right? So essentially, it was just a questionnaire, sort of, how were your symptoms of OCD? It was like strongly agree, strongly disagree, or yes, I did this, no, I didn't do that, sort of thing. Yeah.
Of OCD.
So of OCD, sorry. Symptoms of OCD, symptoms of depression, all of these different things, and maladaptive daydreaming, right?
So it's a bunch of stuff.
A bunch of different stuff, and also maladaptive daydreaming. So, and this article, good on it. It does it does give the limitation of the study, which was that it was based entirely on self-reporting. Which obviously, given that that it's not a major sort of disorder, it's not a recognized disorder, you kind of have to start off with this sort of self-reporting. So that's understandable. But the claims that are being made from self-reports, I find to be a little bit sensational. It is, like, for example, the title of this article is "People with Maladaptive Daydreaming Spend an Average of 4 hours a day lost in their imagination." And so yeah, people in this study did spend 4 hours a day daydreaming, but there were 77 people who were self-diagnosed, who I'm fairly sure were found online in maladaptive daydreaming support groups, right? So it's already there. It's a little bit like this is going to be kind of skewed, isn't it? The data on this. So making the claim that people spend 4 hours a day lost in imagination, sure, of the 77 people in the study, there was an average of 4 hours a day, but is that going to be indicative of the wider population of people who would be diagnosed with maladaptive daydreaming?
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and feel free to jump in, by the way, at any time with...
Well, I'm just enjoying watching you talk. Quite the monologue you've got going on here, but in a really good way.
It's going to go on for quite some time. Look, you're going to wish you were daydreaming for 4 hours after hearing me, because I'm going to be talking.
How do you know I'm not?
I don't know. That's the thing. I don't. So, like I said, there were limitations of the study there. Obviously, self-reporting, small sort of sample size, only 76 people, which, it could be big, could be small, but making the claim 4 hours a day, which is not necessarily what the paper itself did, but what this Research Digest article, that was what the title of it, it's just a little bit like, come on, let's be a little bit more maybe rigorous with the titles for our articles, or the headlines.
Yeah, because somebody might have what eventually gets defined officially as maladaptive daydreaming, and read that article and be like, well, I don't do that for 4 hours a day. I do it for 1 hour a day. So does that mean I'm not got a problem?
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? Let's look at OCD, because this is sitting in my head because we did an OCD episode recently. Do you remember what episode number it was?
Oh goodness, no.
Nope, that's perfectly fine. Well, you just have
it
to
was
go through.
It was kind of recent.
Have to go through all of our episodes to find it. But in our OCD episode, I'm sure I think it was we were talking about the diagnostic criteria. I think it was an hour a day
It was,
maybe
yeah.
an hour a
I
day
remember that.
spending on your compulsions, which was one of the diagnostic criteria for OCD. But let's look at a sort of hypothetical scenario here. We've got people that have got OCD. OCD isn't a recognized disorder, but they found each other online, and they're in the support. They're supporting each other for it. And obviously, the people that are spending lots and lots of time, you'd assume, with their compulsions would be much more would have a much greater desire to find out what's going on and find support for it.
Yeah.
So the people that are spending hours and hours and hours a day are probably going to be looking for help more than people that spend an hour a day. Because realistically, if you're spending an hour a day on your compulsions, you're probably it's probably less disruptive than people who are spending 4 or 5 hours a day on it, right? So if we were to do a little study and we were to get a bunch of people from these support groups, it might be skewed towards the people that spend more time on their compulsions than the people that spend less time on their compulsions.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than, in the same case with maladaptive daydreaming, if we're looking at support groups online, we're probably only going to be looking at people who have gotten so bad that they've gone to look for support online.
But I suppose the thing is about that as well is that although yes, so that article you've read has drawn this sort of kind of arbitrary line that goes, people with maladaptive daydreaming spend 4 hours a day, and it's arbitrarily said that is what people with maladaptive daydreaming do in a misguided way because that's what the result of the study said as the average. But then the line of OCD say, you spend 1 hour or more, then you have OCD. You spend 1 hour or less, then you don't have OCD. That itself is also arbitrary.
Yeah. I mean, bear in mind, there are also other things that come into the diagnosis of OCD as well. And yeah, we've spoken about this before. There are arbitrary lines that we draw. But my point is that if we were to only look at the people with sort of most disruptive symptoms, then we're going to be skewed towards that end, right? And I think it does sensationalize it a little bit if we're looking at people who are suffering so much that have gotten to the point where they're looking for support, right? Yeah. They've gone online to look for support. They've exhausted everything available to them and have had to look online and have found a support group online, right? Generally, you'd assume that would probably be the people that have that has become so disruptive that they can't really ignore it. They can't sort of get by in any other way, right?
I suppose you also get, though, this is not disagreeing with you in any way, but you also get when a sort of situation that someone can be in, a mental condition or whatever, or an illness or whatever crops up, the people who are worst affected by it are probably going to be spotted first, treated first, diagnosed first. And then as we sort of normalize, for example, with autism, when you sort of start normalizing autism in society where it's not this sort of big stigma, you get an increased number of people with sort of more subtle forms of autism may be able to come forward because it's not this big deal anymore.
Yeah.
Not that there are still plenty of problems in society with those things. But more subtle forms of conditions or illnesses or whatever can be diagnosed. The sort of more you research about it, and also the more because you're fine-tuning your instruments and your diagnostic criteria, aren't you? Whereas it's probably quite easy if someone's got extreme narcolepsy, for example, it's quite easy to spot something's up there. But if someone's kind of quite sleepy quite a lot of the time, that's maybe more subtle, and it might take a while to cross into that, for us to be okay, let's diagnose that as narcolepsy as well.
Narcolepsy, I do agree with you.
Yeah.
I think narcolepsy as an example, narcolepsy will have a neurological
yes, I don't necessarily know anything about narcolepsy.
Yeah, no, I know.
Depends up here.
Narcolepsy will have have a sort of
a marker.
A sort of neurobiological marker to it.
Yes.
So
okay.
Yeah, it's more than just I'm a little
got a little bit of narcolepsy.
You're tired.
No, I know. I totally get that,
Yeah.
but and I don't disagree with that at all. My point here is more making a sweeping statement about something that has very little we've got very little data on. Is maybe not the best way of going forward, especially when all of the data thus far is coming. Well, I say all of the data. Almost all of the data thus far is coming from self-reporting and finding people online. And just not to sort of finding people, you can find people online for studies, and that can be fine. It's often viewed as being slightly less scientific, but there can be issues when you're finding people online on support groups for particular things. For example, you may have heard of a certain sort of study that is touted by transphobes that proposes this sort of idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria,
Oh, yes.
which is fake, by the way. Rapid onset gender dysphoria doesn't exist. I do not have the time here to just debunk it right now.
I don't know. Yep.
I don't have the time here to fully debunk it right now, but we'll briefly go through it because it is a good example here. Now, for this study, did they speak to trans kids? What do you think they did?
Parents.
Oh, they spoke to parents. Where did they find those parents, Jam?
Probably on Mumsnet or other forums.
Well done, Luke.
Yeah, where parents are concerned about their trans child.
That's true. Yeah. And
Is this where the mums have just ignored the dysphoria for a while,
This
and
is
then they've
it.
just gone, my child suddenly developed these things that I've been filtering out for 5 years.
It's only because they have suddenly noticed it. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's come on all of a sudden.
yeah, and
That's
they blame
like the end of It's a Sin, isn't it? Where it's a sin? Sorry. Okay, spoilers.
Wait, no, I don't want spoiled either.
No,
Come on,
I've
it's
seen
been
it.
out for half a year. Get on with it.
No, I've not seen it
Half
yet.
a year. I've been busy doing this podcast. Haven't had a minute.
Okay.
Not a moment to spare. No, okay, you say the spoiler, and we'll both go.
Okay,
la,
well,
la, la.
at the end of It's
La,
a
la,
Sin,
la, 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 la,
there is a realization when a person in It's a Sin. This is a very strange experience having to talk like this. But, I mean, yeah, okay. At the end of It's a Sin, there is a person who was gay for a very long time, and their mother didn't spot that they were gay. And everyone around this person is like, how can you not spot it? And she's like so shocked by this. And now her child's got AIDS. And it's really sad. And the mum didn't notice he was gay the whole time. But also, there's the suggestion that maybe she was just ignoring the fact that he was gay, or that he was hiding the fact that he was gay. But maybe she should have known. Who knows? It's a complicated subject. Anyway, that's it.
Is it still going?
That took a long time.
Oh my God. I ran
Well,
out of tunes.
Let's see if that makes the edit.
I think it should, Jam.
Well, I'm going to need to watch the show before I edit this. So I won't.
If you just do the same thing when you're editing, Jam, just put your fingers in your ear. You go, la, la, la.
Just send the clip to Luke and see how it goes. Okay.
Oh, you can edit that bit.
Okay, well, how... Good
Very
point.
good example,
Thank
Luke.
you.
Very
Thank
good
you.
point.
No, that was pretty good.
Conversely, awful example, Luke. No, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So see, we've got both of them. So we can just ignore whichever one is
Drop
wrong.
the right one in there.
But no one else is going to watch the show, so how do you know which one to use?
Neither of us will, but the audience watching can decide whether it was a good idea
Just pay
or a
attention
bad
to the
one.
right one.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
just ignore the other one.
Choose your own adventure.
So yeah, with the rapid onset gender dysphoria thing, they found people for the study through Mumsnet, which is a biased source, and obviously it's not quite the same as finding people on support groups for maladaptive daydreaming. But my point here is that if you're looking in a particular place online, you're likely going to have some bias there, and yeah, it's going to be a bias towards people who have maladaptive daydreaming.
Extreme maladaptive daydreaming.
Yeah, but it might be skewed towards people who have more severe sort of who have a more disruptive sort of experience with it, and there could be people there that don't have it at all. Again, because it's self-diagnosed. This is you've got slightly less clean data, perhaps, right? So that was the study. What was that? That was the Research Digest article. We've got the Atlantic article as well. That was from April 29th, 2015. It's called When Daydreaming Replaces Real Life. Have you guys noticed maybe a sort of theme with the headlines of these articles thus far? Maybe.
Well, it's always talking about. They sound like they're always talking about kind of like it getting in the way of your normal functioning.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I've sort of seen these titles is sort of the daydreaming that never stops. When daydreaming replaces real life. You could very much say it in that voice, and it sounds, oh, here is the new thing.
I was going to say it sounds very clickable.
Yeah, it's a very clickable title that makes that again makes this a very sort of exciting, interesting topic. You're like, oh, what's going on?
Gone wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And bear in mind, I think a key point to mention here is that it's called maladaptive daydreaming because daydreaming is a perfectly normal human sort of function, right? It's something that people just do.
Mm-hmm.
But no?
I don't daydream at all.
Yeah, but
Really?
Okay, right.
Not at all.
What do you do?
Work.
That's my
Poor
point.
soul.
My point is that daydreaming is a normal thing. It doesn't mean that everyone does it. People do
Okay.
it to different degrees, right?
Okay, for you.
Although, I mean, if the fact that you don't daydream, there might be something wrong
Not
with
at
you.
all.
We'll go speak to someone after this.
Okay.
A little-
Yeah.
You need to unwind.
I wouldn't even know what to daydream about.
Maybe
You
work.
don't decide. It
You
just
like
happens.
that, don't you?
No.
You love your work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. But that's why I do it. I don't want to fake do it. I wouldn't choose a VR experience of editing SCI GUYS clips.
Really? Do you know what? I think I would. Just to see how.
Well,
like
you can
real
edit the
they
next
got
SCI
it.
GUYS clip then, Corey.
Oh wait, no, I don't want to do
No,
that.
the point is he doesn't do it. He
I don't
dreams
want to
about
do it.
He wants to pretend to do it.
Yeah, so you film yourself doing it next time and make a little VR experience for me. That'll be fun.
But that's more work for me.
Yeah, but it's more fun for me.
Oh yeah, well you've got so much time to work. You're not daydreaming, are you?
And you love work.
Fuck you both.
So
What do
the
you do with all
Atlant-
that free time?
so the, so the Atlantic article, when daydreaming replaces real life, the tagline was, "Should elaborate fantasies be considered a psychiatric disorder?" And this is probably the best and most measured one, in my opinion. The past two have been a little bit, I feel like, and I'll get to it later, right? I feel like the people that are listening with maladaptive daydreaming might feel that I'm undermining the disorder here. I will have a full explanation of what I think and my opinions and sort of my views on it later on. It makes
Okay.
more sense to just go through the whole thing right now, right?
The
So if-
discourse.
yeah, if you're feeling a little bit worried, if you're feeling a little bit maybe upset, hold on. Honestly, we'll get there. We will.
Stop.
So the tagline is, should elaborate fantasies be considered a psychiatric disorder? And as I said, it's my best article here. Right? It's the one that I think covers the topic in the most sort of even-handed way, because the other ones kind of lend, I would say, maybe undue credence to the information that we've got right now. You know, and again, I'll get to it a little bit more later. So, a woman with a woman who has maladaptive daydreaming talks about dealing with it and then going in to research it later in life. So she got a law degree, and then sort of went into study, got a master's in I think psychological, some kind of psychological area, and then has done some research on maladaptive daydreaming. And she actually got her psychiatrist to do an anonymous case study on her. So she came off of her medication. She was on, I think, an OCD medication, which had helped her sort of control her daydreaming. She came off that for a bit. She had some MRIs, fMRIs done to see what was going on with her brain during daydreaming. And there were specific parts of the brain that they found. That were lighting up during this, which, shows that there is some sort of something going on in the brain there. And apparently, it looked like the sort of behavior was being reinforced, becoming a sort of feedback loop of pleasure, similar to what you'd see with a sort of drug addict, which I want you to hold on to that, because we'll come back to it later. And yeah, so this article was pretty decent. She did a study. She worked on a study. She co-authored it, looking at 90 excessive daydreamers, and apparently 80% of them reported moving in circles, pacing, or rocking, that sort of like movement while they were daydreaming.
So they're doing this standing up?
You can do it standing up. You can do it whenever.
Can you do it whilst you're walking?
Do it while you're walking, driving. Yeah.
Okay, wow, that's another level.
Yeah, I mean,
That's so interesting.
you can daydream at any time, really. If you think, do you ever get a little bit lost when you're driving, you just kind of get lost in your thoughts a bit?
Yes. When I was working, basically every day in Australia, I'd have to drive 45 minutes to work and from work every day. And when you get really used to the route, you can just do it.
Yeah.
Without thinking too much. And so you just naturally daydream.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of scary because you come out of your daydream and you're like, I've been driving the whole time.
And I've
Whoops,
I've
not crashed.
Yeah, so
Wow.
while you don't need to sort of sit. It's not like dreaming, sort of sitting and focusing and closing your eyes. It's just going on in your head and you can sort of see it. But then again, we've spoken about aphantasia. So if you've got aphantasia, it might be difficult to sort of picture that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so people can have quite vivid daydreams, really vivid daydreams, whilst doing other things, standing, having conversations, whatever. But again, some people, this person in particular, it sort of started in childhood for her. She would sort of, I think, walk around with a string, and that's where it started. Sort of those sort of daydreams that she was having then. So this is just a key point there that that it seems that with maladaptive daydreaming, there's a sort of repetitive action associated with it, like pacing, rocking, those sort of things. Yeah. And apparently no one, so 23 of the 90 that they looked at had looked for sort of psychiatric help or sort of medical help or counseling, and none of them had anyone take their problem seriously. Yeah. So the New York Times also did an article on maladaptive daydreaming in regard to the pandemic this year. Well, I say maladaptive daydreaming. They did an article on daydreaming in regards to the pandemic. It mentions maladaptive daydreaming. It's kind of about longing and that sort of thing. It's more about sort of hoping, wishing, wanting things that aren't happening now, and how not living in the present is not good for you. Right? That's kind of what it's about. And maladaptive daydreaming comes up in that. So as you can see, so we've got the study, we've got the sort of newspaper articles, the media, it's in the media from 2015, 2017, 2018, being mentioned 2019. There's even a couple from maybe a little bit more recently, 2020, 2021. It's been mentioned kind of sort of sparingly from 2015. Yeah. And actually since 2020, there's been quite a few more articles about it. So that's what I found. We're still on my little journey. So I've gone to PubMed, found 60 sources, Google Scholar 300.
Yeah.
The Wikipedia page is worryingly empty. So I go back to PubMed and I'm like, okay, right. Well, that's interesting. I will, I've seen some articles. I've not fully read them yet. I'll the BBC, the Atlantic, the New York Times, I'll put all those to the side. I'll read those later. Let's get into the actual science, because I don't want those articles sort of coloring my view of it, right? So I went back onto PubMed. I had a look. I was like, okay, this article, that article, this review, that review, this study, that study. And I kept on noticing a name coming up, again and again and again. And this was a name coming up in almost every single article, like 80% of them, at least. And it was Somer E. I was like, okay, interesting. That is interesting. I mean, obviously, I've seen people, do multiple studies on a subject, but I had not seen someone do this many studies on a subject and be basically the only person doing studies on it. So I looked into it. This was the person that coined the term maladaptive daydreaming, and he's been focusing on it quite heavily since. So he is an Israeli doctor. He essentially, I'll tell you the story of how he coined the term maladaptive daydreaming in a sec. But he also runs a YouTube channel called Summer Clinic, which I think I told you about it, didn't I?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Oh, we were supposed to record this episode a week or two ago, and I pushed it back because this is the point.
The rabbit hole is.
Yeah, this is the point where I just found out all this information. I found the YouTube channel, and I felt compelled to watch as many videos as possible. I watched a lot of the videos.
From the creator of
actually,
daydreaming.
It's incredibly interesting. It's so interesting. So Summer Clinic, and he's got a ton of videos. So he's been doing these videos since at least 8 years. Not all of them are on maladaptive daydreaming, but let's see. Hold on. Let's see if I can have a look at his channel there. He's got about 4,000 subscribers on there, and there are a ton of videos. So there's podcasts mentioning maladaptive daydreaming. There's talks about maladaptive daydreaming. There's just pieces of him sitting to camera and talking to camera about studies that he's done or something else, like sort of reports that he's heard from people that have messaged him about maladaptive daydreaming. Because bear in mind, he's the person that coined the term. So when he coined this term, a lot of people started to sort of email him and send him messages. He said multiple people a week. I don't know if that's still... this was back in 2003, I think he coined the term. He said since then it's been quite a few people a week. I don't know if that's still the case. I don't know. But here's one. Schizophrenia and maladaptive daydreaming. One that I actually just watched. Immersive and maladaptive daydreaming. Another one and he's got a bunch in Hebrew as well. Like he started off doing them in Hebrew, which I don't understand. So I wasn't able to watch them, but I translated the titles. And yeah, so initially he started posting videos on sort of OCD and sort of other things, sort of 7 years ago, and he started focusing more on maladaptive daydreaming in his videos. So he's got physical movement during maladaptive daydreaming history, symptoms, research, and treatment. And this was shocking to me, right? I've done so many episodes of this show, like 100 and what? This is 117, 119?
19, yeah.
119 episodes. I've done 118 episodes of the show up until this point. And this was the first time that I found one person. I'm pretty sure this is the first time I found one sole person behind everything. The only other time I found this was when I went like absolutely nuts and did the vaccines episode, and I found the guy the Andrew Wakefield.
Yeah.
He was behind the vaccines thing, and there was just that one study.
Yeah.
This is what that felt like. When I did the vaccines episode and I tried to find out, okay, where does the idea that vaccines cause autism come from? And I found literally a single study. I felt crazy. I was like, that can't be it. So I'm doing this. And I'm not saying that this is like maladaptive daydreaming should be viewed in the same way as vaccines causing autism. What I'm saying is that this was driving me nuts. That I tried to find as much as possible. And almost every study comes back to this one guy. And this one guy seems to be the one that's just really pushing maladaptive daydreaming. I was like, okay, is this a conspiracy? What's going on?
Pulling the strings.
I have no idea what's happening. Why is he the only person that seems to be talking about it? And he's been talking about it for like 18 years, and still he is more or less the only person that is talking about it. What is going on?
The man behind the curtain.
Yeah, actually, it was. And this, I thought, was the end. I thought I had found it. I'd got into the Wizard of Oz. I'd found out that he's just that old guy behind the curtain, and I was on my way home clicking my heels 3 times. But no, that is not what happened.
You're trapped.
Trapped. Exactly. No, so
Robbed,
I looked.
Shoes stolen.
I kept on looking more. I was digging deeper, trying to find more and more about this because it was really, really confusing me. Because the more I read about maladaptive daydreaming, the less, I guess, convinced I was that it should be considered a disorder in the way that it is, and the less convinced I was that it was just the medical industry medicine lagging behind, right? And again, I'll get more into that in a bit. I'll explain more what I mean on that. But up until like at this point, I'm just like, what is going on? Is this a real thing? Why is this guy pushing it? What is going on here? Is this all being dealt with in the sort of best way? So it wasn't 2003, actually. It was 2002. In 2002, Eli Somer, he noticed that 6 survivors of abuse in his care had something in common. He was a trauma clinician. So these people would sort of enter fantasies for 8 hours at a time for up to 8 hours at a time to escape what was going on sort of in their real lives, or to escape the sort of emotional pain that they were going through and to escape their memories. And some people imagined idealized version of themselves living a perfect life. Others created different relationships with different characters. People had sort of different stories that were going on. Some people pictured themselves in war. Some people pictured themselves saving people. Lots of different sort of daydreams of just an idealized sort of life, or a more interesting life than the one they were in right now. And apparently the plot lines usually had sort of escape, rescue, and captivity as themes. And the thing is that the article that I got this from said it wasn't just normal daydreaming. Aside from the sheer amount of time they spent doing it, the patients found it difficult to control. It was adversely affecting their work, studies, or social life. Often they would pace or rock back and forth as they daydreamed, sometimes while listening to evocative music. So at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to these studies. I'm going to look at these studies and see what is going on, because this is interesting, right? This is really interesting, because the way this had been presented to me up until this point, it's maladaptive daydreaming is a disorder of increased daydreaming. And that's kind of presented in a way that it's like, okay, so obsessive compulsive disorder is a disorder in which you have sort of obsessive thoughts and compulsions to quell those obsessive thoughts, right? There is a sort of mechanism in it that links
loops background.
Well, it loops background, but there's a mechanism in there that links people with OCD, right? That's why OCD is its own disorder. But maladaptive daydreaming, the more I looked into it, the less convinced I was. And bear in mind, right, I'm going to go through some articles that I've read. Some studies that I've read. Most of them from Somer, because he's the only one doing them. And some of them I've only been able to read the abstract. I've not been able to get to the full art. I've not been able to get to the full article. The abstract obviously has the sort of the overview, the sort of a brief sort of review of the methods, and then the results. I haven't been able to look into the exact methods myself, so take some of this with a sort of pinch of salt, because there's only so much information that I've been able to get. So yeah. Maladaptive daydreaming, the evidence for an under-researched mental health disorder. This is one from May 2016. So this one is from Somer. And he looks at 477 people, 107, Yeah, 447 people. 107 of them are controls, aged 13 to 78, from 45 countries, who responded to online announcements. Which again, I'm just like, all of these studies are being done online with a massive group of people, and the thing that links them is that they've self-diagnosed with maladaptive daydreaming, and they're in online support groups for it, right?
Yes, and there's no. It sounds like if somebody says they have maladaptive daydreaming, but if you were to develop some kind of proper diagnostic criteria, you would put them outside of maladaptive daydreaming. For the purposes of this study, Somer is taking their self-diagnosis on face value.
Yeah,
which is problematic. It messes your data up potentially.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? I feel like, obviously, to develop diagnostic criteria, you need to understand, and this is the thing, at the end of all of these studies, more research is needed. To get diagnostic criteria, you need to understand what you're looking at. And so it's understandable to take self-diagnosis or to look at, it's understandable to take self-diagnosis, look at symptoms, but it's interesting to me here that maladaptive daydreaming is already essentially being considered by seemingly everyone involved as a disorder. Right, that's to me that is what it seems to be. That it's being considered as a disorder. In fact, when people have sent this to me, they've said, "Oh, I've got maladaptive daydreaming." I'm like, okay, but there's not diagnostic criteria for it.
So you haven't got you're presenting with the symptoms. You colloquially refer to as maladaptive daydreaming.
Yeah, you're presenting with the symptom of excessive daydreaming.
That's interfering with your life.
It's interfering with your life. Yes. So again, bear that in mind, right? These are all tiny little, I'm throwing you tiny little pieces, right? And they're all going to come together to make a beautiful mosaic at the end of this, right?
The really crucial thing there, if anyone listening presents with these symptoms, is that what Corey and I are saying is not that you don't have a situation that is undesirable, or that you don't have a situation that is affecting your life, and that is potentially heavily affecting your life, and that it's not real and we don't believe you. What we're saying is there is a difference between saying, I have X condition and I'm presenting with these symptoms because right now you're presenting with these symptoms because X condition doesn't yet officially exist.
Right.
It's not officially recognized as, so you can't say, it's like saying, I have underlying tooth disorder. It's like, well, that's not a thing. You don't have but I have tooth pain. Yes, you can't deny I have tooth pain, but I don't have what is underlying tooth disorder?
It's like when people say, oh, I have rejection sensitive dysphoria. In regards to when they've got ADHD, they say, oh, I have rejection sensitive dysphoria, as though it's a sort of as though it's something that has got diagnostic criteria to it.
Yeah.
Rejection sensitive dysphoria is a sort of is not something that is super officially recognized. It's just symptoms that have been recognized by people that have ADHD and perhaps some people working with people that have ADHD.
Right.
And it is a more easy way to describe an experience. But when people start to, it's in the same way as when, you know, Asperger's used to be a sort of a sort of disorder or a condition of its own, and it has then since been sort of folded in with just autism. You don't have Asperger's, you have autism because Asperger's doesn't exist. It was just a mischaracterization of autism, right? In that, essentially, if you had high intelligence, using the terms that would have been used, if you have high intelligence and high functioning, then you have Asperger's. You don't have autism.
Right.
It's the same thing. It's just a person that's got some autistic traits and doesn't have other autistic traits and is smart. That's not a disorder of its own, right? And so what people tend to do...
It's so weird to me when you talk about these things because it's like, well, but all these things are made up.
Yeah.
They're real, but they're also like, they're all arbitrary lines.
Yeah.
That I think, anyways.
But the point here is that the distinction between Asperger's, and I've read a bit about this specifically because it was looking, we'll get to it later. So the reason that the distinction between Asperger's and autism was removed because there's no reason for the distinction other than valuing intelligence and high functionality. When you actually look into autism, there is no such thing as high functionality because it's not a sliding scale of, oh, not very autistic and, oh, super autistic. There are a collection of different autistic traits, and for any one of those traits, you can present them strongly or weakly or not at all. So
and they also might be combined with some separate trait like high intelligence.
Yeah, and high intelligence is unrelated. It's like saying, okay, I'm going to make a different classification for everyone that is depressed but is smart. All the smart. And the thing is, right, when it comes to autism, because of the societal view that we've got of autistic people, we're like, oh yeah, autistic people are like this, and so we make the distinction between autistic people and people with Asperger's because we have this societal view of
They don't
autistic
fit the
people.
mold.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as being sort of Asperger's I think was relatively high functioning and high intelligence, but sort of lower social functioning. The fact is that those sort of ideas of how to view autism are outdated.
Yeah.
But we don't have that view that people with depression are like, you know, inherently not intelligent or inherently low functioning beings that are lesser than people that don't have depression.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't feel the need to make that distinction.
So when we're talking about how maladaptive daydreaming is not an officially recognized thing yet, although may well become so, which I'm sure you'll get onto. And I'm saying, Corey and I are not saying that you don't have maladaptive daydreaming. You don't present with the symptoms that you called maladaptive daydreaming. When somebody says, I have maladaptive daydreaming, they don't mean I have an officially recognized medical condition. They mean I am presenting with these symptoms, and I call that I have maladaptive daydreaming. So why aren't they allowed to say it like that?
It's not saying that they're not allowed to say it like that.
Right.
I think to fully answer that question, I need to give you more information.
Yeah.
And I actually have an answer to that question pre-written for later in this episode.
Yeah.
So if we could put a pin in that. But right now, I'll just say that approaching it in that way can lead to some issues, right? There could be some issues in saying, I have this thing, when it's not something that is recognized, even if all you mean is, I have these symptoms.
Okay, because when you say I have this thing, you're implying that thing has been sanctified a thing.
Yeah, and sure. And there are issues outside of that as well, right? There are, and I really want to get into this right now, but there's definitely information that I need to give you before we can have this full conversation.
Right.
I'm like, you got me so excited.
Shut up, received.
No. You've got me so excited that I need to shut myself up. So we spoke about the first study on maladaptive daydreaming from May 2016. And this is not the first study, just the first study that we're talking about, by the way. Just the first study that I was mentioning. There's another study that I've got from April 2021 called Maladaptive Daydreaming and Obsessive Compulsive Symptoms, a confirmatory and exploratory investigation of shared mechanisms. Essentially what this is saying is it's looking at maladaptive daydreaming and obsessive compulsive and symptoms of obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders. And it's just looking into how they can have similar mechanisms that lead to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So something that leads to OCD could be something that similarly leads to maladaptive daydreaming, right?
Yep.
Okay. So it basically says that, guess who this one is written by?
Oh, Somer
The YouTube guy.
Yeah. And I don't want to like sort of have a go at Somer. I mean, he's clearly, you know, he's been studying this for a long time. He's probably the sort of preeminent source on this in terms of as a sort of expert, or, you know. But again, I am not criticizing him or his work, but I maybe have some issues with the way that it is being presented. That is all I'll say for now.
Okay.
We'll get onto it in a bit. We'll get onto it. This is, like I'm saying, there's all these little pieces that are going to build up. It's going to make sense in the end.
Cool.
So this one basically looks at obsessive compulsive disorder and maladaptive daydreaming. And there's a high comorbidity with maladaptive daydreaming and obsessive compulsive spectrum symptoms. So essentially anything that's sort of lumped under obsessive compulsive disorders or symptoms of obsessive compulsions, all that sort of stuff. There's a high comorbidity, which means that a lot of people with maladaptive daydreaming also have symptoms of obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders.
I see.
Yeah.
Is that a hint?
There's a tiny little hint there. And yeah, so what they did was they looked at dissociation, trauma, sense of control, and mind wandering as potential mediators. They explored whether maladaptive daydreaming is more strongly related to obsessions or compulsions. They identified patterns of specific obsessions or compulsions common in the sample of people with maladaptive daydreaming. So they looked at 510 people. So again, this year this came out. It's a bigger group of people they looked at. I think the highest sample size I saw was 1,000, which, like looking at the potential number of people that have maladaptive daydreaming, that's probably it's a fairly decent sort of number of people. But again, this is a group of 510 participants with a self-identified maladaptive daydreaming. They completed online questionnaires. So again, online questionnaires from self-diagnosed people, 510 of them. And yeah, so apparently, so basically they looked at this, and there are a lot of people that have got maladaptive daydreaming that also have obsessive compulsive symptoms, right? That's something to bear in mind. It is, and this the sort of the study says future work should develop useful interventions for this type of shared psychopathology. So essentially, what they're saying is that if we're going to look at this again, we should look into ways to deal with this shared sort of root cause. And then another one that I've got is from July 2017, the comorbidity of daydreaming disorder, maladaptive daydreaming. And this was basically, they were just looking at the comorbidity of maladaptive daydreaming with different disorders. Basically, if you've got maladaptive daydreaming, what other disorders might you have? When we look at autism and ADHD, a lot of people that have got ADHD can also have autism,
Depression,
anxiety, all of those different things, right? OCD, anxiety, there's different disorders that if you've got one, you could see a lot of people in that group that have got it as well. I think like autism and OCD as well, actually, wasn't it? Did we not see that?
I think you did say that, but I wouldn't want to make the claim.
Okay. Instead of us making the claim, you can go back and watch our OCD episode.
103, by the way.
Oh, I saw you looking
I
at that one up
googled
earlier.
it. Yeah.
Oh, Jam!
I didn't know it.
Low
earlier.
moment for
I didn't
you.
know.
The lower
Listen,
moment.
as soon as we get to the hundreds, I'm like, nah.
You don't need to
It's too
remember.
many. It's too many.
So, 74.4% of the 39 participants so basically, this one is a little bit better, right? They
79.4% of the 39 participants. You don't need to give a decimal place when your sample size is under 50.
So
just give the number. Weird.
So they essentially what they did here was at this point he wants to call Somer, by the way, wants to call a maladaptive daydreaming disorder, or I think excessive daydreaming. He's kind of moving away from maladaptive daydreaming, and essentially what they did was they basically interviewed 39 participants who met the criteria for maladaptive daydreaming, because there is now they've produced sort of a test for maladaptive daydreaming. All this stuff has come out. There's tests for it. Again, I couldn't quite access this stuff because the system that I usually use to access it, fully legally by the way, was not working. Kept on giving me dead links, and all of the studies on this are on that sort of system. So it was just utterly
Not
locked
good
out of it. But we might do another episode of maladaptive daydreaming. Maybe we will.
Like and subscribe.
So, of these 39 people, they gave them an interview. They had met the criteria for maladaptive daydreaming. So this is better in some ways. We've got people that are meeting their criteria, not just self-diagnosed. Which, wow. To be fair, again, if you're finding a new disorder, obviously it's going to have to be self-diagnosed people, right? My issue is not with self-diagnosed people. My issue is not with studying self-diagnosed people because you don't have any other option. My issue thus far has been with the claims that have been made based on studies of self-diagnosis.
Yeah,
that was my issue. So this is quite a bit better. The only thing here is there's only 39 participants, which is quite low. It's not a very huge sample size, 39 people. You can find you could find 39 people from the UK and not make necessarily bold claims about the British population. Again, that's not really fair. British population is much bigger in comparison to the people with maladaptive daydreaming, okay? But still, 39 participants, fairly small study. So 74.4% of them met the criteria for more than 3 additional disorders, 41.1% met criteria for more than 4 disorders, and the most frequent comorbid disorder was attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, which was 76.9% of people. 71.8% of people met criteria for an anxiety disorder, 66.7% for a depressive disorder, and 53.9% for an obsessive compulsive or related disorder. And 28.2% of them have been very low and gone to a very dark place. We're not going to be very specific here, but you could probably gather what was going on with that 28.2% of people. And it says this finding provides evidence that that maladaptive daydreaming. Every single time I read MD, I don't want to say maladaptive daydreaming. I don't know why. My brain does not connect those two together.
Medical doctor.
Major depressive disorder.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but there's a D missing, and my brain just gets confused.
Mud.
So it says this finding provides evidence that MD, maladaptive daydreaming, is different than normal daydreaming, and that these individuals experience considerable distress and impairment. Again, I haven't been able to read the full study, so it is difficult to say this, but based on the presentation of the data, I don't know if you can say that it shows that they experience considerable distress and impairment. But no, you can say that, obviously. I don't know. I feel like that implies that it's the distress and impairment comes from the maladaptive daydreaming, right?
Right. So, for example, the distress could come from the societal expectations placed upon them.
Sure. I mean, yes. I think that my point here is that what I'm sort of leading to here is that the distress and impairment could be very much the reason for the maladaptive daydreaming, which is maybe, which is honestly potentially what is said in this study, right? But I don't want people. Okay, I'm not saying that I don't want to say the study implies that, but I want to be clear here to anyone listening that sort of when it says this finding provides evidence that maladaptive daydreaming is different than normal daydreaming, and that these individuals experience considerable distress and impairment, that they should not take from that the maladaptive daydreaming inherently causes considerable distress and impairment. Because it can, obviously. If you're daydreaming for 8 hours a day, that's going to cause distress and impairment. But then, based on some of the sort of stories that I've heard from a number of like basically those 4 articles that I read earlier on, you know, the sort of Atlantic BBC, there seems to be a trend, and from the other articles I've read as well, there seems to be a trend that people that have maladaptive daydreaming tend to have a reason to want to go into sort of fantasies, right? Mm-hmm. So that there is some distress. And this is a coping mechanism of sorts that leads to more distress. In a sense, like self-harm is brought on often by distress, and self-harm itself can cause more distress, you know, because it's...
Yes, you wouldn't say that self-harm causes you to be distressed about the world. You would say you're distressed about the world, which causes sadness and also the symptom of self-harming.
Yeah, and self-harming itself could then sort of snowball and make you feel worse because of the right? Bear that in mind.
You're so excited.
I'm very excited. So
Corey destroys.
No. Corey doesn't.
Maths and logic.
Corey doesn't destroy anything, right? We're gonna come full circle. We're gonna get to the end of the story soon.
Corey supports.
Another study that is not by Somer from 2018, maladaptive daydreaming as a new form of behavioral addiction. This one I wanted to bring up as a new form of behavioral addiction. This is where I find it's a little bit more interesting, right? And again, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to put this on Somer because I think Somer is doing good work. I think that Somer's intentions here are solid. I just think that perhaps the way that people consume Somer's work is perhaps detrimental to the greater cause.
Oh, yes.
Well, we'll dig a little deeper into that in a bit. I'm just giving you little tidbits, little tasters. Yeah, a little.
I feel like we're going up a hill and we're going to fall off it.
Oh, you're going to fall off that hill.
Yeah, we're going to come crashing down
into the rabbit hole. The rabbit hole's waiting at the bottom.
It's waiting right at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah,
it's a very wide rabbit hole as well.
Yeah,
plenty of room for everyone. All the listeners, all the patrons.
Bit snug.
More of a bear hole, then, isn't it?
It's a big rabbit.
Big rabbit.
Yeah.
Okay.
A rabbit.
One that can kick your door down.
Yeah.
It's just a bear with rabbit ears on, isn't it? Anyway, back to the actual episode. So, the aim of this study was to find, essentially, it was basically just to look into maladaptive daydreaming. So this one was essentially just an interview with a patient who sort of. It basically was an interview with a patient who had sort of the symptoms of maladaptive daydreaming, right? And the results of this were that maladaptive daydreaming as a strategy was developed as a strategy to cope with distress, but led to uncontrollable absorption in fantasy, social withdrawal, and neglecting aspects of everyday life. It was coupled with excessive internet use and viewing of porn. Now, this was just on one person. This was just one. It's a case study essentially, right? But I think what was interesting about this was how it sort of dealt with the sort of idea of maladaptive daydreaming. So it says that the patients should be questioned about maladaptive daydreaming during clinical assessment, which I absolutely agree with.
Mm-hmm.
This is the issue, right? That a lot of people that have this issue, they go looking for help, and people don't know about it, right? They don't know. It's similar to what Dodie was talking about when she was here for her episode, that people don't necessarily know exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it says further studies are necessary to determine whether maladaptive daydreaming constitutes a separate syndrome or is part of other behavioral addictions. So this is the thing that is the sort of issue here, that when you present maladaptive daydreaming as this is a thing, I've got maladaptive daydreaming, then a lot of other things tend to come with that, right? Whereas if you view maladaptive daydreaming more as sort of the behaviors that it is, getting realistically addicted to vivid daydreams, then you can view it as more of a sort of behavioral addiction, like an addiction to viewing porn, or an addiction to playing video games, or an addiction to sort of surfing the internet, or any other sort of addiction like that, right? And it becomes slightly different. Instead of thinking of it as instead of thinking of it as its own distinct disorder with a neurobiological sort of precursor, in the same way that you'd think of OCD as that, or schizophrenia as that, or OCD spectrum disorders, schizophrenia spectrum disorders as that, you can then see it as more of a behavioral addiction, as part of something else, as a normal behavior that is being used as a coping mechanism.
Do you know whether people with maladaptive daydreaming symptoms, is it a compulsion they feel like I want to daydream now, and then they choose to go do it in the way that you might get the urge to smoke a cigarette and then go and smoke a cigarette? Or is it like narcolepsy, where you just are suddenly asleep, or you are suddenly daydreaming, and then you come out of it and go, "Oh, how did that happen?"
I think it's more the former than the latter.
Okay.
I think from what I've read, and if you experience this, head into the comments and let us know. But from what I've read, it seems that people have the option to go in and out. The issue is not. It's less the case of, let's say, with dissociation, where it happens and you're like, when is it going to end?
Yeah.
When am I coming out of this? And it's more a case of like, I'm in this and I just cannot get myself to stop. In the same way that if you say you've got an addiction to playing video games, you could be like, I could play a game right now. Play a game.
Yeah.
You'd be like, okay, I can put down the controller.
Yeah.
I should put that down the controller now, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
And, in the sense of like, you want to keep on, like you are compelled to continue doing something regardless of the fact that you know it is bad for you.
Yeah.
It's like where the bit you don't choose happens, whether it happens in the choice to do it or whether it happens in the choice to want to do it.
And the thing is, yeah, I suppose what you mean. Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah. Do you want to explain that again?
So like, if you have something like, for example, narcolepsy, from everything I've heard about narcolepsy, you can't choose whether or not you're going to fall asleep. Falling asleep happens, and then you wake up and you found out you've fallen asleep. Whereas if you have, say, a smoking addiction, you technically could choose to not smoke or choose to smoke. You don't find yourself smoking, although maybe with extreme addictions you could, like, absent-mindedly put a cigarette in your mouth and light it. That's possible. It's more that you can't choose to not get the urge to smoke. And the urge to smoke is so overwhelming that you always do choose to smoke.
Yeah.
And so it's basically where you place the part that's out of your control. Is it in the actual doing of it, or is it in the overwhelming urge to do it?
Yeah.
And you still, regardless of those two things, you still, if the urge is strong enough, don't really have a choice in the moment, because to not do it would be so painful, because resisting the urge is so strong. But they're different things.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I think it's interesting because it's a really difficult sort of line to draw there, and you've done it like really well. And I feel like a lot of people might not make themselves aware of that line.
It's subtle. It's a really subtle difference.
Yeah, because I think people hearing this might think like, oh, you're saying that you've got a choice to do this, you've got a choice in addiction. Well, technically, yes, you do. But the whole point of addiction is that no, you don't, right? Like
effectively, you don't.
Yeah,
yes.
like exactly, right. So you technically have a choice, but the point of addiction is that when faced with that choice, like you said, the urge is so overwhelming that you more or less don't have the
like
choice.
if I hold a gun to your head and say, jump up on the spot 5 times, you kind of have a choice, but also if you don't do it, I'm going to shoot you in the face.
Yeah, so I mean, even though I really want to jump,
and then
I guess I can't.
There's overinflated
Like if I say,
consequences.
put a gun in your face and say, kick Jamp, and then you kick Jamp, and Jamp goes, you had a choice whether to kick me or not. Like, well, sure, man. Okay. But the stakes were so high that I kind of didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But those are different things, but the outcome is similar.
And then you've got
just the mechanism is different.
And then you've got something like Tourette's, which we did in our episode on Tourette's. Do you remember the episode number? No, that's totally fine.
I don't remember now.
Honestly, I'm not even.
I don't remember how long ago that was.
I'm almost worried that I made up
70
us doing a
something?
Tourette's episode. We did it, right?
Yeah, we did.
We definitely did.
Okay,
Yeah,
good,
definitely.
It
fantastic.
was really good. I really liked that episode.
And you'll really like it too.
I feel like it's in the 70s or 90s.
So the Tourette's episode, we spoke about being able to suppress tics, right? And there is a way to sort of suppress a tic, but it can become uncomfortable and difficult to do it, and you can't necessarily always do it.
Yeah.
But there is the sort of ability to suppress it there. So while there is a force like sort of pushing you to do it, it's like holding back a sneeze, right? You can hold back a sneeze if you really try, but it is uncomfortable and difficult to do. And if you're doing it all day, imagine trying to hold back a sneeze all day.
It takes up so much energy.
Yeah. So in that sense, you could say almost, oh well, you do have a choice to do it, but at some point you don't. You know what I mean?
You don't have the urge to say something rude or strange every day all the time, and so okay, sure, I have a choice.
In that sense, like, oh, you generally can have the choice to not sneeze, but you don't have the choice to whether you feel the need to sneeze
urge
or not.
to sneeze.
Yeah. So, so in this, while this is a case study of one person, I'm not trying to go off of what it says about this person. What I'm saying is that the sort of the thing that it's brought up that patients should be questioned about maladaptive daydreaming during clinical assessment. Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good thing to come out of it. And the interesting thing that they've said is that further studies are necessary to determine whether maladaptive daydreaming constitutes a separate syndrome or is part of other behavioral addictions. That is an interesting thing to me as well, because from what I've not just from this study, from what I've seen of the other studies, that seems interesting to me, because that seems to be a sort of sticking point there, right? And if you remember, being treated with a lot of people with a number of people with with maladaptive daydreaming have OCD, and some people can treat their maladaptive daydreaming with OCD medication.
Yep,
which helps there. And actually, I think in one of the cases, the woman who became a lawyer, who studied law, and then went on to do studies on maladaptive daydreaming after getting sort of I think a master's in sort of psychology. I think her family had issues with OCD, her family members as well. And as we will know from our OCD episode, that it's a sort of hereditary thing. It's familial in that sense, or it can be at least, which I think is interesting there. And this goes on to talk about the DSM, the DSM-5, which only has gambling disorders in the behavioral addictions chapter. Although I feel like internet gaming disorder might have been.
I think internet addiction is in there now, is it not?
Really?
The DSM-5 gets updated regularly. So this is from 2018. I think that internet gaming is added, or gaming addiction is added in there.
Wow.
Into the DSM-5, but under behavioral disorders. So
you are correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, nice. I like being right. Yeah, and apparently, so internet gaming can involve role-playing games, RPGs, or live-action RPGs, where, and you see what I mean. So in an RPG where you're going into a sort of completely different world, you can see how that can become a more addictive thing for someone that's trying to escape.
Mm-hmm.
And in a number of cases, or at least based on what this is here, that in some cases, at the very least, it's as a form of escapism, right? Especially going into video games when the world that you're in is not one that you enjoy. You've got bad things going on. You can go into that to escape, and it makes sense that when you look at a lot of the reports of maladaptive daydreaming, the contents of those daydreams, they're involved in people having better lives than the ones that they've got.
Yeah.
or doing things that they couldn't do in normal life, or something that's just a bit more
A bit
interesting.
more exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. And that I found very interesting. And it goes on to say there's more evidence for dysfunctional forms of imaginative involvement, defined as maladaptive daydreaming. So basically, there's more and more evidence for maladaptive daydreaming, which might be expressed through extensive book reading, watching films, or gaming. So instead of sort of daydreaming, you are reading books, you're watching films, you're entering those fantasy worlds, but not necessarily creating them on the fly yourself, right? Which is interesting because you can see how those are similar.
Basically, yeah, absolutely. Do you have is there any information about the kind of pharmacological, like, what the addiction is? Is it addiction to a specific neurotransmitter that's released during dreaming and released during gaming?
The only thing I could say about that is that Somer, I think, has proposed that there might be a link, I think, with serotonin.
Right.
Similarly to OCD, there might be a link to maladaptive daydreaming and serotonin, but that's not really an answer to your question.
Yeah.
The closest answer I can give is that maladaptive daydreaming and serotonin have been proposed to be linked in some way by Somer. So,
well, yeah, I mean, OCD is often treated with standard antidepressants, so
yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, so linking it pharmacologically more specifically, no. This isn't super in its infancy. I mean, we're still at the point of basically just sort of interviews rather than, and I think that sort of fMRI scan was done by someone who said, let's do this. Let's use me and do it, sort of thing. You know, I'll come off my medication and we'll look at my brain because we need to do this.
Wow.
Yeah, right. It's very cool. And yeah, so this is the thing. This paper is sort of looking at it through more the lens of, maybe it's not its own thing. Maybe it's more of a behavioral addiction, right? And I think that is an interesting way of looking at it. Maladaptive daydreamers may share certain similarities with problematic internet gamers who play games to avoid real-life difficulties. Escapism. Sorry, I was laughing a little bit there because you said the word problematic right next to the word internet gamers.
Said some problematic things in their past.
Yeah, they have said some slurs that they are very
This
embarrassed
group of
about.
people who are addicted to internet games and also said racist things in the early 2000s. that are similar to this group of maladaptive dreamers.
Sometimes I remember that I am I do a podcast, right? We all do a podcast. I make all of my money from the internet. I'm very online. And sometimes I forget how online I am. I think that my level of online is a perfectly normal level of online. And then I read something like problematic internet gamers and I realize, no, Corey, your brain is poisoned by the internet.
Are you a problematic internet gamer if you are receiving dopamine reward, like a reward system from like a particularly well-performing tweet or Instagram post? Because essentially you're rolling the dice every time you upload something. Kind of internet gaming, really, isn't it?
I'm not rolling the dice. Everything I put out there is gold. Scroll through my tweets, Luke. Not a single dud in there.
I suppose the argument would be that because you're earning a living, it's not actually removing you from your real life obligations. It's actually helping your obligations. Therefore, it's not maladaptive.
That's what I tell myself.
That is, I'm sure it is.
That's the story I'm going with.
And that's the strange thing about that line in the diagnostic criteria.
If Corey does it for work, then it's not a problem for Corey.
Streaming 23 hours a day, but you're earning money? No, not a problem. That's fine. Streaming 23 hours a day and you're quitting your job? Problem.
Look, I think you found the issue. It's capitalism.
No way.
Not
Moving
again.
on briefly.
Well,
I know that.
It's always
Not
capitalism.
again.
So this is the thing I wanted to get onto. I wonder is that like how much of this is like when we talk about like maladaptive this or like this is getting in the way of like your everyday obligations in life. It's like, but how much is this to do with the world and society we live in, and how much is like because you're not you're not adapted to this weird constructed world that's only existed for a couple of hundred years, and you evolved on a different world.
Weirdo.
Medicate it right now. Give it this artificial drug made in a lab.
Subdue.
You are the problem. Like how much? Obviously, like if people are experiencing distress, then obviously that is a problem. But like how much, for example, if you maladaptively daydream for 2 hours and then you come out of that and you experience distress, how much of that distress is because you think you shouldn't be doing that?
Yeah.
Like if you were living on a beach island resort and you had coconuts growing on the trees and you had fish in the sea and you only had to really be conscious for about 3 hours a day, of course you'd spend the rest of the time having a nice time in your dreams.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know things about this. But I do wonder, I always come back to this example I give, which is like, if I were a frog, right, sitting on a leaf, right, and I've got a full belly, and I've got I'm not thirsty, I'm not hungry, I've slept enough, I don't have any physical needs right now. I know that my nervous system will react to any kind of threat quicker than I could consciously react to it, right? Mm-hmm. Why should I continue to experience the world? Why shouldn't I just regress into a nice daydream? No, seriously, I'm not saying this in like a...
This is an example you use a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I love that about you.
If I'm sitting in my well-built brick house, I've got a fridge full of food, I've got a tap that gives me water all the time, I have every like physical need. Like the majority of most of the developed countries have like a significant portion of their citizens have all the physical basic needs met. Obviously there are other things that aren't met for everybody, but the physical basic, you're not going to starve, you're not going to die of thirst, that kind of stuff is met. Why do the majority of us not just sit in our houses completely content all the time? And the answer is probably, in part, capitalism. But why? Like, it baffles me.
I think a lot of people do. This is the thing.
Oh, we exist in this little bubble of mentally ill people. Sure.
Yeah, a lot of people go home and are happy to watch Love Island and stuff.
But they still require an external entertainment. Why can't they? Like, why, if those people...
Oh, because human brains don't work on the long term of, all my needs are met. Human brains work on the thing of, I need my needs to be met right now all the time. Are they going to be met right now? Are they going to be met in 5 minutes? I don't know. I need to meet my needs. Oh my God, no. What if there's no food? Your brain is constantly trying to survive.
Yes, I know. But
you can't. Yeah.
We exist. I gave Corey a resource last week. So I don't know whether you watched it yet. It's for a future episode.
I started actually, yeah.
We exist in this Western world, a capitalist Western world, where we are taught we need to consume. We are taught quite seriously that happiness comes from without, right? That you need to consume things to be happy. You need other people to make you happy. That sort of thing, right?
Sorry, that was really good. It works in 2 levels. Happiness comes from without, as an out with, but also without. If you have everything, you can't have happiness because happiness comes from the desire to get things.
Yes.
It is in getting things that you get happiness, but not in having things.
No.
Having things is boring. Having things sucks. Ugh, I hate having things.
Yeah.
I just want to get things.
Exactly.
That's why billionaires exist, because they are disgustingly disgustingly stuck on getting. They don't care about having. They just want to get and get and get.
Continue
and get.
getting.
Sorry, Luke, go on.
Yeah. So we in this Western world, we have this. We have the scientific age where we are learning how to produce better materials. We're learning how to construct things more efficiently. We are very obsessed and focused on transforming our external world to meet our internal desires. Right? Would that be fair to say? Mm-hmm. And we are not particularly focused, although maybe the psychological fields would say that we are, on being content internally, so you don't have to compel the external world to change all that much, right? And then you have Asia, where they've been, in their various religions, Hinduism or Buddhism, they've been focused pretty heavily on consciousness and on sort of training the mind to need less. Now, obviously, they have their own, they have capitalism out in 4 forms of capitalism out in Asia.
Who took it to them?
Well, we probably took it to them in most cases, yes. I think there's documents of saying we need to install capitalism in other countries and all. Yeah, anyway. But we're so focused on the external, right? And so what I get very confused about is why we haven't realized that's not the point.
I don't know, I guess because person smart but people dumb. Right? Like a person can know something and a person can have that idea. You as a person can have that idea. but collectively as people, working together is hard,
Yeah.
right? And having
But what I mean is, why have we not spent energy and effort in, if you're saying human brain silly, human brain get happiness from getting, I would actually kind of disagree. The way we've trained the human brain, it gets happiness from getting.
oh sure, yeah.
Yeah. But why have we not focused on developing quote unquote technology methods like the East have at satisfying our internal needs as opposed to compelling the external to satisfy our internal needs? Processes, training, that kind of thing.
I mean, I guess now capitalism, if we keep on going back, then you have to ask, oh well, why did capitalism come about? Why was feudalism a thing? Why? And you get back. I think it's hard for large groups of people to work together because ultimately altruism works in a certain size of group, but when that group gets too big, the individual needs to think about themselves. And there's so much externally in terms of competing that it's hard to reflect internally, because reflecting internally in an environment where everyone is competing.
Everyone's fighting.
Yeah. So back to just one more study. Trapped in a daydream, daily elevations in maladaptive daydreaming are associated with daily psychopathological symptoms. Essentially, I'm just going to cut this one down. It was from 2018 in a sample, again from Somer, in a sample of 77 self-diagnosed individuals with maladaptive daydreaming. They looked at relevant daily symptoms for 14 days, including maladaptive daydreaming, depression, general anxiety, social anxiety, obsessive compulsive symptoms, and dissociation, as well as positive and negative emotions. Essentially, they looked at a bunch of different disorders: OCD, depression, anxiety, maladaptive daydreaming, all in people that have self-diagnosed with maladaptive daydreaming. 77 people. Over 2 weeks. And what they found was that obsessive compulsive symptoms were consistent, were the only thing that you could use to consistently predict maladaptive daydreaming episodes. So the day before, if they had said they had a high number of sort of obsessive compulsive symptoms, right? If they had a high number of obsessive compulsive symptoms on one day, then the following day you could predict that they would have a high number of maladaptive daydreaming symptoms, regardless of the number of obsessive compulsive symptoms they had on the same day as the maladaptive daydreaming symptoms.
So maladaptive daydreaming, in that sense, is a coping mechanism to some other internal state.
But yeah, sure. You could take that from this
Conclusion you could draw.
Absolutely could be a conclusion you would draw. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I don't want to say.
No.
I don't want to undermine that.
No, absolutely correct me when I make sweeping statements that could be a single interpretation of data. That's very valuable. Thank you.
It's the thing. I feel like some people when they watch this or listen back, they hear me say something like that to you, and they think, "Oh, Corey's just dismissing what Luke is saying." Not dismissing what Luke is saying at all. All I want to point out is that Luke's view is a perfectly valid one, but it is one singular view.
Mine was a hypothesis, which I was stating as this is the only way of interpreting the data. And it's not.
Which is
so cool.
Honestly something that everyone does all the time, and it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, you get two data points and you want to build a bridge between them, and you make a little story to build the bridge, and then someone else is like, could build a different bridge though.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, now I have two bridges.
Exactly. And it's a thing that people do normally, like just in everyday life, and that's perfectly fine. And we're all very much geared into doing that, which is why, I mean, like you can very easily say it on the show, the only reason I need to say, maybe not, is because a lot of people that listen to this show will hear that. And this is something that terrifies me. A lot of people will hear one of us say something and think, that's what it is. And even if they don't consciously decide to think that, that'll stick in their brain as, oh, I do remember someone saying this. And so when you're talking about this sort of stuff,
you parrot it, and that's how fake news happens.
Exactly. You need to be really careful.
And now Corey and I are Donald Trump. Ah,
two of us together. Yeah, look at us.
Yeah.
Or just one Donald Trump.
Corey and Luke in a big suit being Donald Trump, wearing a wig.
You do the voice, I'll do the arms. Anyway.
Maladaptive daydreaming is caused by a coping mechanism for OCD. That is the only truth. No alternative facts here.
Amazing. So basically this, there's more study needed, but this is the study actually where it says, for example, serotonin levels may possibly be involved in the development or maintenance of this condition. The findings may also provide clues to potentially potentially beneficial interventions for treating maladaptive daydreaming. So basically, we don't know what causes maladaptive daydreaming at all yet. That's usually called the etiology, right? No idea what causes it. We don't even really know any mechanisms of it. We don't know anything. But from this, what he's saying is that Maladaptive daydreaming and obsessive compulsive symptoms coincided in what seems to be a vicious cycle. And basically, he said, understanding the shared mechanisms between those systems may inform our understanding of the etiology of maladaptive daydreaming. Essentially, he's saying one feeds into the other, and it's a cycle, and understanding how the mechanisms behind both of them might help us understand what causes maladaptive daydreaming, because we don't know. But it's interesting here that throughout this, we've noticed that there's a link between maladaptive daydreaming and OCD. We've noticed there's a link between maladaptive daydreaming and sort of other disorders. And that's kind of getting to my point here. We're almost there. We're at the front door. We're about to knock. And here is the knock. What is a mental disorder?
Oh, I don't know, Corey. It's a lot of pressure.
Some kind of mental condition that prevents you from doing
Is it deviating from the norm?
normal things.
So, I actually, I don't know if I've got, hold on.
I don't know the language to use. Oh, the big book's coming out.
Oh,
I
is this
brought
the
my big
DSM?
old, no, I don't have the DSM.
Oh, okay.
I brought my psychopathology book. And in this, there's actually a whole section at the start. I just want to give, just for a visual representation for you guys and for all the people watching
Okay.
at home. I want to show you. So there are a few pages on this, if we get there, as to like what constitutes a mental disorder, or how do we sort of define these. And it is interesting. I had a read of it, and it is difficult. So from sort of here, sort of maybe this page, this page here, we've got like about 4 pages there, 6 pages,
Oh.
8 pages,
Oh
Oh.
my word.
10 pages,
Oh.
12 pages,
Ooh.
14 pages,
That's quite
16,
cool.
18, 20, like all of these pages. We've still not gotten to the end. There are so many different ways of sort of defining exactly what a mental disorder is, because it is difficult. We could go down the sort of route of maladaptive behavior and harmful dysfunction, which is one that we talk about often, which is a sort of, say, a normal behavior that is become harmful or dysfunctional or maladaptive because it is done too much or done in a way that disrupts someone's normal life and becomes ends up causing distress. So in case of maladaptive daydreaming, daydreaming is a perfectly normal thing for someone to do. It's not bad to daydream, but doing it to an extreme degree and being able to control it can cause distress, and it's maladaptive. It is a behavior that is not adaptive to normal sort of daily life. It is badly adapted, maladaptive. And yeah, it is interesting there, right? It is interesting that it's difficult to define specifically what constitutes a mental disorder, but one of the ways is like, something that is sort of condition, it's something that is harmful, right? That is how you'd say that. I mean, that is a sort of way of defining what something that is sort of basically looking at something that is dysfunctional. You can say that it is disordered, right? Or you get what I'm saying, right? That a normal behavior can become a sort of maladaptive one, or a dysfunctional one, if it is done to a degree that it causes distress.
Yeah, or gets in the way of your ability to survive and thrive.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think what we need to go through now is this is from Hawaii.edu on the DSM-5. It's basically a university sort of it's basically sort of educational material from a university describing what's going on in the DSM-5. Now, I want to talk about the difference between symptoms, syndromes, disorders, and diseases. So a symptom is an observable behavior or state. There's no implication that an underlying problem necessarily exists, or that there is physical etiology. In terms of, there's no sort of suggestion that there is something that is necessarily underlying that's causing it necessarily, or that there is a physical sort of path that leads to that symptom, or like one distinct physical path that leads to that symptom. It's the simplest level of analyzing and presenting a problem. The next level is a syndrome. It's a higher level of analysis. It's applied to a constellation of symptoms that occur together or co-vary over time, right? And I actually read something that pointed out that, interestingly, a syndrome and disorder / disease can tend to be kind of sexist in that, for at least just based on the ones that I looked at, sort of like polycystic ovary syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, some of these things are called syndromes, and those tend to be the ones that more affect women, interestingly.
And that's because they're given a lower status.
Maybe.
Less
I'm not going to say that outright, but that was just something that I read that I found interesting. That it seems that that if something affects women more, it might be more likely to be labeled as a syndrome rather than a disorder or a disease.
And is that opposed to something that affects women more versus something that affects men more, or something that affects women more versus something that affects people?
I think those are the same thing. Something that affects people and something that affects men more. That's the
No,
same.
no,
No, I know. And look, I know.
Like if something affects 50% of the population versus the other 50%, or 50% population versus 100% of the population.
I think it's just if it affects women more, as in if it's something that is present more in women rather than being sort of equal amongst the population, or affects men more, then it is more likely to be labeled as a syndrome. This was just from a speech that I read. The person studies sexual reproduction, or reproductive. It's a doctor studying sort of reproduction. So, I'm not going to say outright that is absolutely the case, but it is an interesting point that was brought up in that talk. But a syndrome, as I said, it's a constellation of symptoms that occur together, and whether certain sets of symptoms vary with one another is an empirical question. Essentially, whether those symptoms are all connected in terms of as being one disorder is the question that you need to sort of figure out through study. A disorder is like a syndrome. It refers to a cluster of symptoms, but the concept includes the idea that the set of symptoms is not accounted for by a more pervasive condition.
Okay, like when you have something and you go, okay, we've ruled out that it's not this, we've ruled out that it's not this, therefore it's this other thing.
Yeah, so it's its own thing, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? And as with symptom and syndrome, there's no implication of etiology. There's no implication that it's got the sort of distinct sort of cause, right? That makes sense.
Does that mean there could be multiple different causes that give rise to the same thing? Or does it mean that there's no structural change in the brain?
From what it says here, I'm pretty sure that from what it says here, I'm pretty sure that it's just there is no distinct one that has been characterized.
Okay.
Rather, as in there could be multiple.
Like diarrhea can be caused
diarrhea
by
is
many
a symptom.
things. Okay.
But I guess what we're talking about disorders, right? So a major depressive disorder can be caused by multiple
Many
things.
things. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's also then a disease, which is the highest sort of level of classification that you've got. So a disease would be something that is a disorder where an underlying etiology is known, right? So if it's unknown, then it would be a disorder. If it's known, then it's a disease, and it's the highest level of conceptual understanding. So if it's a disease, we know, we basically know not as much as possible on it, but we know enough to call it a disease, right?
That's so interesting because my layman's term understanding of the word disease would, to me, suggest that it's something you catch. Like you catch a disease.
Because it's easier to understand the underlying etiology of disease if you can catch it.
But you can have diseases that are not catchable. They're caused by a structural change.
Yeah, cancer.
I don't know. I've never heard of cancer referred to as a disease.
I'm sure you could call cancer a disease.
So interesting.
Well, I mean, actually, cancer, I guess, because there's no one thing. There's not one cancer. But no, I don't think you could call cancer a disease. But it's easier. So scratch that cancer disease thing. But my point is that it is easier to understand the cause of a disease if it is caused by something that is contractable.
Yes.
Right? Because like HIV. Not HIV, AIDS.
Is a disease.
No. Yeah, it's a disease or syndrome. It's a syndrome. Yeah, it's a syndrome again caused by AIDS.
That's interesting. Yeah, all I'm surprised about is I've never heard disease mentioned in the same conversation as like kind of like a mental thing, other than like if you were to catch a disease that eats away at your brain, for example.
Yeah, true. I mean, I guess the idea is that it's harder to understand the cause and causes of things when it comes to that. Whereas with other diseases, if it's catchable, if it's caused by a bacteria or a strain of bacteria, then it makes sense. It'd be easier to understand where that comes from.
Yeah.
And so I also found a nice paper that talks about 3 approaches to understanding and classifying mental disorder, the DSM-5 and the National Institute of Mental Health Research Domain Criteria. So essentially, this was talking about the sort of problems that come in when you're trying to define what a disorder is. So they've got 4 key issues: etiology, the cause of it, essentially, categories and dimensions. So it's what we talk about a lot. It's not an all or nothing thing, right? There are different dimensions to it. So in terms of autism, for example, there are different ways of presenting with autism. And we sort of viewed it as a spectrum, but now it's being sort of viewed sometimes more as a sort of wheel of symptoms. And you can have, you can strongly show one symptom, but less show another, a sign rather than symptom. So that's the issue here. It's not just, oh, you've got it, or no, you don't. It's, we need to draw a line somewhere, and it is kind of broad and reaching. And so this is the thing. Categories and dimensions is one of the things that they mentioned. So you can have it to different varying degrees. As ADHD, for example, you can have certain sort of symptoms, certain sort of signs of ADHD present them very strongly or not as much, and that can change sort of day to day. Thresholds, something we talk about a lot as well. You spoke about earlier. You sort of dividing things into categories, but also reducing that complex information into a level that you can process, but also the threshold at which someone has depression and which someone doesn't have depression, which is what is mentioned here, is a really interesting one, right? Because you can have, it's not quite as simple as someone who has a disease where there's a physical thing, you can be like, okay, this. Or where you could do blood tests and be like, we've got this. If someone's got depression and you're like, okay, so they've got disrupted sleep, they're feeling low, they've got all these other things. To some degree, it relies on self-reporting. But to another degree, and which, makes it difficult because every person is different. And so you've then got to draw a line somewhere, and it's difficult to understand exactly where to draw that line, right? And different doctors might draw that line in slightly different places. And there's also comorbidity, and you've got to think about people. We think of people that have got mental illnesses as having a particular disorder, and we like thinking that all disorders are distinct. But when we've got a lot of comorbidity between different things, it's more difficult to have that view, right? Because they all kind of feed into each other, because a person is not just a collection of individual disorders. They are an entire person, and we've put the category of disorder on them, right? It's a difficult thing to wrap your head around, but people don't have disorders, right? We apply disorders based on how we see people acting. And those are two very, very different things. But the language that we use, the way that we go about things, it very much implies that the disorder is the thing that exists, and the person suffers from multiple different things, rather than we see all these different behaviors in humans. And so we've categorized some of them, and some people have behaviors that overlap and look similar. So we've got different disorders, and some people can have multiple disorders, but ultimately they are an individual person with their own individual issues, and we've applied these disorders to them. Right?
Yes.
And so it is difficult in that sense to understand how those disorders sort of interact, whether they're one sort of thing, whether they're different things. At what point does sort of two highly comorbid, for example, ADD and ADHD, right? There used to be attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that were two related things, but separate. You either had ADD or ADHD. And then they were like, no, it's just ADHD. You just present differently. You have... You've got fewer of these symptoms, so it's the one thing. And it's same with Asperger's and autism, right? Oh, well, you've got high intelligence and the social functioning, you've got Asperger's, and if you're anything else, and you've got autism. But wait, no, hold on, they're the same thing. We're just going to have to call them autism. At what point does one disorder become multiple disorders, and vice versa, right? Where do you draw that line? It is difficult. So that is the overview. This is where I want to get to my actual point here. And the point of this is about pathologizing, self-diagnosis, and sensationalizing. And that's been the sort of through line of this, that I'm not saying that the symptoms of maladaptive daydreaming don't exist. That would be a ridiculous thing to say. There are people who experience that. I mean, people that we know that experience that. The issue lies more in labeling this as maladaptive daydreaming, trying to act as though it is its own disorder, and instead of being perhaps a symptom of something else, or because there is no sort of understood mechanism of it. It's highly linked to things like OCD and ADHD and even depression and anxiety and whatnot. It is difficult to go out on a limb right now and say this is a disorder that people have, rather than say a behavioral addiction.
I guess the really hard part is so that's all well and good from a scientific medical perspective, in terms of putting it down in a book and all that kind of stuff. But what someone's really trying to do when they, as a layman, tell another person, I have maladaptive daydreaming, is they're trying to, I guess, elicit some kind of, empathy and understanding from the other person to say, I'm not just choosing to be like this. It's not my fault in sort of like, I don't like, and allow the other person to think, well, there's some kind of authority or at least some kind of reason that means I don't blame this person for the way they are presenting. That's what they're trying to do. They're not necessarily trying to claim, oh, well, I've got this thing.
I'm not. That's not
what
I'm saying.
But what do you do about that?
My point here is that you can still have that experience. You can still say, this is the thing. I'm not doing this on my own. You don't need to classify it as a disorder of it in its own right, because what you end up getting is people self-diagnosing with I have maladaptive daydreaming, in the same way that people self-diagnose as being like, I have rejection sensitive dysphoria. You have that presentation of a symptom, but saying that you have it in the sense of having it like a disorder is a mischaracterization that can lead to difficulties. So what I'm saying here is that instead of saying, oh, I've got in the same way that saying, instead, like, let's say you've got a video game addiction, right? If you say, if you view it as, I have this video game addiction disorder, right? And you don't view it as a behavioral addiction, that is, internet gaming disorder is classified under behavioral addictions. If you view it as, oh, this is a thing of its own right, we need to find out why it's so heavily associated with depression and whatnot. Then what you're looking at is, why am I sort of predisposed? Why am I so stuck playing these video games? Rather than, there is an outside cause to the addiction to video games. Do you see what I mean? So instead of saying like, instead of viewing it like, because my view of this is, if it's so comorbid with ADHD and OCD and depression, all these other things, that, like, to me it seems like, well, is this not escapism? Is this not escapism that has gotten out of hand, in the same way that self-harm is trying to feel something and that getting far out of hand, rather than it being its own disorder? Like, self-harm, if we started classifying as self-harm disorder, anyone that self-harms has got self-harm disorder. If you self-harm, then we need to find the mechanism in your brain that causes self-harm disorder. It doesn't make sense to me. Maladaptive daydreaming, from what I've seen, I can't see it being more than a sort of symptom or syndrome caused by other factors. And the sort of saying, oh, well, yeah, it's caused by this, it's linked to serotonin. Serotonin might be in the same case of OCD. Does not make more sense to look at maladaptive daydreaming as someone is trying to escape the reality that they're living in. And so they have turned to daydreaming. And it has gotten so far out of hand that they have an addiction to it and they cannot stop. Rather than, I have maladaptive daydreaming, it's a disorder that I have.
I agree with you. But I think if you try to explain that to somebody who is maybe not the most empathetic person in the world, doesn't understand the complexities of scientific categorization or whether something is a disorder versus, I think what I mean is that person in that moment is just trying to explain, if somebody says, oh, I have an addiction to daydreaming, like, the average person who doesn't have like a high level of empathy and doesn't really understand anything might be like, what are you talking about? Whereas then if you say, I have maladaptive daydreaming disorder, for example, or I have maladaptive daydreaming, the person might go, oh, right. Well, now I don't have the right to be angry because you have a thing.
Right, but again, that can be caused in enough. That can be. You don't need to call it a disorder to get that outcome. Right. That's my point.
Do you not?
No, it can be a symptom of a disorder.
Sure.
No. Again,
I'm talking about when you're talking to somebody who doesn't know anything about any of this
stuff.
Then
we cannot.
Which is most people.
No, but then self-harm, for example, right? I don't think we should. We should talk about things in this way just to cater to the people who know nothing about it. Because then you've got like teenagers on the internet who are thinking, I've got maladaptive daydreaming. I've got something that specifically in my head makes me need to daydream, rather than thinking, I have problems that are causing this that are solvable. I have other disorders that need to be treated themselves.
Okay.
I can control the daydreaming, because the daydreaming is not being caused by some external force on me. It is a symptom of an underlying disorder, right? When it's a symptom of an underlying disorder, you can treat that disorder. When it's just I daydream a lot and it's a disorder, that is a much harder thing to look into, right? That's my point. Again, if self-harm were to become its own disorder, just so people could be like, people say, oh, you're self-harming for attention, right? You're doing it for attention. Now, people are going to say that regardless, right? But if we then decided, okay, self-harm is now a disorder, and someone was like, oh, you're self-harming for attention, actually it's a disorder. Sure, you've got to respond to that person, but does it help anyone that's self-harming to know that they've got self-harm disorder and that it's not necessarily caused by any of the other things that's going on?
No, but it might mean that the idea that self-harming is caused by a cry for attention is because there is a general idea that it's a disorder, might be then, it's easier to shut down any claim that it's an attention-seeking mechanism.
Sure, but I don't think that's necessarily worth people
Inaccurately discussing things.
Not just inaccurately, because the view of it then changes how people understand it and themselves.
Yeah.
Again, as I've said, if you're looking for there not being a treatment that works for maladaptive daydreaming, and different things work for different people, different kinds of therapies work for different people, this and that. To me, that kind of looks like, is it not because you're treating the sort of OCD or the OCD, like, again, there could be a maladaptive daydreaming disorder, right? That is got a similar mechanism to OCD, but there can also be a maladaptive daydreaming that is coming purely based on I feel horrible living in this life and I want to escape it, right? Because this is the thing. It doesn't need to be one single disorder. It could be a symptom or some kind of syndrome that is sort of associated with a number of different sort of disorders or mental problems, right? But viewing it as its own distinct thing gives it a certain weight and a certain sort of view of, this is how my brain works. This is a disorder that I have that is not necessarily treatable in and of itself. That then makes it difficult. I mean, look at Tumblr in 2014. The number of people that said, I've got social anxiety, self-identified with self-ID'd, self-diagnosed with social anxiety or depression or anything like that. These things will spread a lot. And when that happens, it becomes sort of romanticized, right? The number of things I saw on Tumblr of kids like romanticizing self-harm or romanticizing eating disorders, which like inevitably is going to put that out in front of more kids and be like, oh, well, maybe that's the thing that I could do.
Yeah, to be fair, I first self-harmed because a guy in my school romanticized it. And I felt like crap, but it was like, oh, maybe that will help because this guy says it does.
And this is the thing. Again, what I've read on the maladaptive daydreaming, what I've read about maladaptive daydreaming from people that do it, going to the support groups, in some cases there's people that don't necessarily want to stop, right? There's people that see it as almost a sort of there's people that romanticize it in that sense. And again, trying to view it as a disorder, it is, you saw this happen with aphantasia, right? I've seen someone talk about living with aphantasia as though it's like living with a disability. And like,
I mean, it technically is a disability.
It's not it technically is a disability in the sense that,
sure, in the linguistic sense,
in the purely semantic sense. Look, yes, you've won this.
No.
You've won this battle, but I swear to God, you're going to lose the war.
I'm well up to losing this war. Don't you worry. I'm joining your side.
Fantastic. Again, I've seen people. It's when aphantasia became a massive thing. I saw people start talking about like, oh, I've got aphantasia. Look at it. I've had aphantasia. Shut up. It's not a big deal. Just you get on with it. Jesus. People.
Tell you what, it's very annoying when you want to make a music video and you can't see any of your ideas.
Just conceptualize it, Luke. Just conceptualize
That's what I have to do.
it.
It's really annoying.
Right? Oh my God. That last one, Mind Blank, No Thoughts. Go and watch it. Very much lived up to the conceptual idea of it. But seriously, I've even seen hyperphantasia come about where people are talking about, oh, I've got hyperphantasia. Right. How do you know what is a normal level of visual, like not acuity, like sort of visual representation in your mind? And then people start being like, I have hyperphantasia. This is something that I'm like, thinking about. My worry here is literally in viewing maladaptive daydreaming as it's a distinct disorder, right? Before we really have any evidence to suggest that it is its own distinct disorder, is not necessarily going to be the best for people who are daydreaming too much, because instead of viewing it as this is an addiction that I can solve, they view it as this is a disorder that I have.
And there's
Right?
nothing I can do about it.
And it's frustrating because I'm viewing it through the lens of I have an addiction to this thing. And I want to talk a little bit about myself because it's one of my favorite topics. Yes, Luke, go ahead.
Before you move on, can I just ask, are there any examples of people who've managed to de-addict themselves from...
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And this is the thing. I used to be in high school, and every night before bed, I would lie in my bed and, I could not sleep. I had insomnia. I slept like 3 hours a night.
Corey, is insomnia a symptom or is it a disorder?
Insomnia is I'm going to put my fist through your face, Luke.
You said I have insomnia. You didn't say that. Or are you presenting with insomnia? I don't actually know which
Luke,
one's the
have you ever
correct
had
term.
diarrhea?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You win this battle, but you won't win the war.
Yes, I will.
You probably will. You've got all the research.
Sitting in front of me on this handy dandy iPad. So, so that's why I was insulting Jeff Bezos, right? Because he's my no.
He makes the Kindle fire.
I want to set the Kindle on fire. No, I don't. I have no strong feelings one way or the other on a Kindle. So back to me.
Oh, okay, Corey. Fine.
I was in high school and I was, not having a great time in high school. And, when I couldn't sleep, I would lie awake in my bed and I would basically daydream at night. Confusing, I know. They were not sleepy dreams, they were wakey dreams. And I would do it in bed. I think I would do it in class and stuff as well, every now and then. I never thought of it as being, I definitely look back on it now and think, oh, that was a coping mechanism and a half. To be fair, it was based on something that I was writing with my friends at the time, right? It was based on stories that we were writing. So I used it in a way that was beneficial because while instead of living my life or whatever for a couple hours a night, I would just have this vivid daydream about stuff, right? And it was great. It was escapism, all that stuff. There was also other daydreams that were not about that, right? But they were, I can look back on it and I'd be like, those were all escapism, right? Didn't get to the point where it was like hugely interrupting my life, but it was taking up, but that was basically based on the way that I set it out. I was saying, yeah. And if I'd let it get out of hand, maybe it could have. But the thing is that there is that, right? So there is a way of controlling it in the same way you can control an addiction. Like I know people that are very clearly addicted to alcohol, but then they will say, I can't do it alone. I can only do it during these days. Still pretty much if you cannot stop, you're probably still addicted to it. But you've like managed to manage that down to a point where it is not impacting your life in a hugely negative way, right? And so you can take something that is an addiction and sort of get to a point where it is, sure, maybe you're not fully weaned off it, but where it's not hugely intrusive on your life. I mean, at that point, it probably wouldn't be called an addiction, but still, it's not terrifically. And again, that's where the issue of when we try and say what behavior is sort of disordered, what behavior is maladaptive, right? It is still negative behavior, but you've managed to control it in a way that it doesn't hugely impact your life.
Could you not make an argument, though, that if you have the ability to control it, if you have the ability to regiment it, then some people may be more addicted and unable without help to do that?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that people can do it by themselves. No,
right, okay.
But what I'm saying is that I've read things of people that have got like I said earlier, avoiding triggers, this and that. Going to therapy doesn't help some people, but having plans for like, okay, avoiding this trigger, avoiding that, don't listen to that music, spend less time in bed. You can start to cut it down. I've seen people that have used their excessive daydreaming in a way to explore ideas and to get around problems in their life because they can explore it from different angles. Use it to sort of as a creative sort of fuel, right? And write it down in that sense. Create from it. So in that sense, I think characterizing maladaptive daydreaming as its own specific disorder, and I'm not saying that it isn't, right? I'm not saying we could absolutely Eli Somer could come out tomorrow with a brand new paper that says, I found out exactly how maladaptive daydreaming works and it is its own disorder. And I'd say, good, fine, let's go with that. But realistically, I don't from what I've seen, and I'm not saying this just for myself. There are academics, there are people that are experts that don't agree with calling it a disorder. They don't agree in pathologizing sort of normal human behavior in that way, because it is normal human behavior to daydream. And when we pathologize things, it can lead to issues. Same with when we spoke about our Stockholm Syndrome episode. Go and listen to that. Stockholm Syndrome, we've come up with this idea of this conceptualization of this is what Stockholm Syndrome is. If you're in a hostage situation, you're going to fall in love with your captor. You're going to love them, and that is abnormal. But actually, in the situations where it's happened, it's either been mischaracterized or it's a perfectly understandable thing to do. For example, the Stockholm Syndrome situation, the initial one, the police were awful, and so of course the captor sided with the captees. No, the captors. Captees sided with the captors?
Yes.
Yes. The hostages sided with the captors because the police were being awful to the hostages.
To the captors.
The police were being awful to the hostages.
So what, we after the hostages?
Yes.
Why?
That's why well, go back and listen to our Stockholm Syndrome episode.
Okay.
So
I remember.
Yeah. So that's what's going on there. Like there are issues when it comes to saying that this is its own disorder. I've kind of gone through them a little bit. It is not to say that there aren't people that daydream excessively to a point where it affects their life. Of course, I'm not saying that. That is your experience. That's absolutely valid, and that is not something I'm saying doesn't happen. What I'm saying is the way that we talk about this we should be slightly more careful about it, because when we start to apply a disorder to we start to sort of apply the sort of idea of disorder to any sort of negative behavior, it can become difficult, and it can make people. Sounds awful, but it can make people be like, oh my god, I've got maladaptive daydreaming. I'm maladaptive daydreaming, and I know
turn it into a personality trait.
Yeah, and I know from experience. I'm sure we all know from experience that having an experience, right, and feeling alone in that, and then finding other people that share that experience is a fantastic feeling. And so having a word to put to it is, oh my god, there's a word for this. That is amazing. But then trying to say that it is a disorder in and of itself when there isn't the research there to support it is maybe putting the cart before the horse a little bit.
The crucial thing is there isn't a very good understanding of the meaning of the word disorder.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Sure, yeah.
That is one take-home point, is that there isn't a particularly, like, when you say, I have maladaptive daydreaming disorder, if you were to say that, then that is an incorrect use of the word disorder. If you say, I have maladaptive daydreaming, you're not saying it's a disorder. That's like, you should be saying, I present with maladaptive, I have an addiction to daydreaming. What are you?
I don't have an issue with I don't strictly have an issue with people saying I have maladaptive daydreaming, or I have maladaptive daydreaming, or I maladaptively daydream, right? Saying I maladaptively daydream, it's harder to say, obviously, but it does kind of make you think a little bit more of, oh, it's not a disorder. I don't think the issue is specifically with the words that people say, it's with what they mean when they say them. Because if you look even at the Wikipedia page, it is way back at the start. It is we've seen this. It's presented as being a disorder or like a condition that is not recognized by the greater like sort of medical sort of world. And seeing people say, I have this thing, can you talk about it? It is difficult to look at that and think maybe we're getting a bit too ahead of ourselves and calling it this. Maybe we should look into it more, and we might understand that it's actually a symptom that is indicative of something else. Because, and this is a so I'm going to quote, give you a quote here. So this is a quote that is from someone called Klinger, who is a University of Minnesota psychologist. So they said, in response to the question, would there be any potential downside to calling maladaptive daydreaming a pathology? They said, only in the sense that if you call it a pathology, you're looking for a very specific, concrete kind of cure, and that tends to be a pharmaceutical cure. It's not as productive as it would be it's not as productive as it would be if you handle it on a behavioral basis. Many people who have intense plot-rich daydreams don't function well at work and in relationships, he noted. And for those who don't function well, it could be productive to tackle the themes and conflicts that come up consistently in their daydreams, resolving those issues through therapy. For some people who have difficulties limiting their daydreams, therapy and other forms of behavioral modification may work well. It's certainly true that not everyone who is troubled by excessive fantasy should be medicated, but for me, as well as for many others online, traditional talk therapy couldn't stop the relentless pull of my imagination. What's going on here, right? It's essentially, this psychologist is saying, pathologizing this could be difficult because what would happen is we have one cure that we're looking for. We've got like, you've got maladaptive daydreaming. Maladaptive daydreaming drug. I've been to the doctor for depression, and they're like, here's citalopram. I'm like, okay. But it's not solving any of the issues, though. Because I've got other stuff going on. But they just chuck the sort of medicine at you. And with maladaptive daydreaming, when it comes to, like, some people can definitely benefit from antidepressants, right? But having it being viewed as this one disorder with this one cause, it's not necessarily the most apt way of looking at it, rather than seeing it as maybe a symptom or a sign of something else. Yeah?
I got to say, if I had maladaptive daydreaming as a symptom that I was experiencing, and I went to the doctor, and I had sort of convinced myself through reading sources that were maybe potentially not referring it to it in the way that in the accurate way you're describing, and I had convinced myself this was a disorder, and then I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me it might be a symptom of OCD, I would feel, I don't think he believes me. I don't think she believes me. Because I had married myself so strongly to the belief that it was a disorder, if they said it was possibly anything else, I would be like, I want to get on with believing this is a thing, please, and I want you to fix the thing, rather than tell me I have a different thing. I don't know if anyone else would feel like that, but I've certainly been to the doctor where I've said, I feel like I have this thing, and they've gone, maybe it's this other thing, and it's causing this thing, and I have instantly been like, no.
Yeah.
And then I listen because they are a doctor.
Yeah. And that is the issue, isn't it? That people, for better or worse, tie their identity to these things, right?
Things which define their experience.
Yeah. And ultimately, the whole sort of symptom disorder, all these things, they are useful categories that we use. And the whole point of them is to be useful. And if they're not useful, then we need to change them. That is the entire point, right? They're not things that strictly exist. They are things that exist based on how useful they are. And if you get to a case where someone says, if you get to a case like that, if you go to a doctor and they say, well, actually, this thing that you've tied your identity so strongly to might actually be a sign of this other thing, and there's other underlying problems that are causing it, then if they then reject that, then that's an issue, right? So I think the thing I want to talk about in this episode is really to get out the idea that, like, one, finding community, finding people that understand your experience is fantastic. Tying your identity to that, while it is a very easy thing to do and it can be a very comforting thing to do, can lead to problems down the line. Like, if you tie your identity to having Asperger's, and then Asperger's is no longer a diagnosis. I mean, I won't sort of like, I won't say, oh, you can't say that you've got Asperger's. But when people try to say, I've got Asperger's, it's this thing, this is a thing that exists. I'm like, well, the reason that it doesn't exist is because it's dismissive of autistic people in general, right? And tying your identity to Asperger's in that way means that when it's no longer a disorder, you're then left without a place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and you haven't actually lost anything other than a word that you're attached to.
So if you're someone that's sort of maladaptively daydreams, has maladaptive daydreaming, and is listening to this and feels like, oh, but why are you saying this isn't a thing? You're taking this away from me. I'm really not trying to take it away from you at all. I'm just trying to say that where the research is right now, having this as its own disorder is maybe a bit too soon to be saying that. And I'll just give one more quote and then I'm more or less done. I've got one more thing I want to say after that, but it says, this is from the BBC article that I mentioned earlier. Some psychologists don't think maladaptive daydreaming is a useful term. These skeptics say that it risks pathologizing normal behavior, or that it's unhelpful to look at maladaptive daydreaming as a condition in its own right, rather than as a byproduct of, say, depression or OCD. And it's interesting that these were the things that I was thinking, right? And then I saw it in the article. I'm like, oh, wow. And these are what obviously I specifically looked for things that disagreed with me, and in doing so I also found things that did agree with me. And it's interesting that the thoughts that I had were mirrored by some experts. Again, I could be absolutely wrong. As I've said, tomorrow it could come out that I'm totally wrong on this, but this is just sort of my view on it. So there you go. That is that on Maladaptive Daydreaming. Another issue with this is that I found maladaptivedaydreaming.org, and this is less of an issue with calling it maladaptive daydreaming a disorder in its own right. It's a kind of two-pronged thing. One, sort of medical professionals not really being aware of it and not necessarily knowing how to sort of treat it is an issue here, right? For the way forward of that would be to probably for medical professionals to be able to treat it on a case-by-case basis. That would definitely be an easier way to solve that, right? Two, understanding what maladaptive daydreaming is as a symptom or as a disorder would be a good way for medical professionals to be able to help people more effectively. But because it's not very well understood in terms of the greater medical world, you then get people that are coming together online. So I found this on maladaptivedaydreaming.org. It's a maladaptive daydreaming test, and we'll go through it, right? So it's basically someone that has maladaptive daydreaming. They say they've got maladaptive daydreaming, and they've developed this test that you can take. And I'll just read the questions out to you. You basically need to choose a number between 1 and 10 based on whether you strongly agree, which is 10, or whether you strongly disagree, which is 1. So question 1, maladaptive daydreaming has impacted my life in a severely adverse manner. Maladaptive daydreaming is something, this is question 2, maladaptive daydreaming is something that I do multiple times a day, every day. Question 3, maladaptive daydreaming has impacted my academic, social, and or professional life. Question 4, my maladaptive daydreams have become increasingly abstract over time. Question 5, I repeat many of the same scenes or scripts from my maladaptive daydreams many times. Question 6, my maladaptive daydreams have grown. My daydreams have grown much more complicated and complex over time. Question 7. My maladaptive daydreams no longer revolve around the real me as the central character. Question 8. I find it difficult to concentrate when I absolutely need to because my maladaptive daydreams will enter my head. Question 9. I find myself thinking about my maladaptive daydreams whenever I have spare time. Question 10. I consider my maladaptive daydreams to now be a central part of who I am as a person. One issue with this. Maladaptive daydreams, you're begging the question. My maladaptive daydreams do this if it's a test for maladaptive daydreaming? No. You do not start off by saying my maladaptive daydreams do this. That's like starting a depression questionnaire with my depression causes me to not want to go outside. You're testing for depression. Do not say you have depression in the questions.
Yeah, because then you can't answer 0. Because am I answering the maladaptive daydreaming that I don't have causes me to dream a lot, but I don't have it. So -10?
Yeah. Your daydreams do this, right? But the fact is, you're kind of maladaptive. And this is the thing. This person said they had maladaptive daydreams. They said that they developed a sort of way of getting over it in a few weeks. And now they have a course that can help other people.
How much does it cost?
I think $25 for the course. 25. They have different levels. Look, I saw that it cost money, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, that makes sense. And this is one of the first results that comes up when you search maladaptive daydream test. And this is the issue. It feels like they're pathologizing this and then exploiting people through it. Right? It's worrying to me that
Creating
this being
a problem,
seen,
selling the solution.
yeah, it's worrying to me that this is being seen as its own complete disorder rather than something that is caused necessarily potentially by other things, like obsessive compulsive disorder or depression or through ADHD or some kind of behavioral addiction due to external stimuli. And it could be all of these things, but viewing it as a singular disorder gives the idea that it has a singular cause and a singular way of solving it. And it leads to people that exploit you like this person.
You assume.
I assume.
Yeah. It might be wonderful.
Okay, look, they could be wonderful. They absolutely could be wonderful. But the questions that they've developed are, I think, not good ones because they beg the question. They assume already that one maladaptively daydreams in the question to test whether someone has maladaptive daydreaming. And I think selling a course to people, no. No, sorry. No, that's not okay. And they say on the website, maladaptive daydreaming is not included within the DSM despite repeated efforts and advocacy for its inclusion. But that doesn't mean you cannot begin to understand whether or not your daydreams are maladaptive and stop them. Like, ultimately, if you're daydreaming for multiple hours a day and it's becoming an issue in your life, this is advice here, not medical advice from a doctor. This is advice from me. If you think that you're daydreaming too much and it's becoming a problem, go to your doctor and tell them this, right? And tell them that you're daydreaming too much. They might not sort of believe you, but you need to point out that you're doing it for X numbers of hours a day. You cannot stop yourself. Try and characterize it to them as some kind of addiction to daydreaming, and say that you've exhausted everything you can think of to stop it, right? And just point out that there are studies that have been done on it that have linked this to OCD, that have linked it to depression, that have linked it to ADHD, and it could be a sort of not very well known symptom of that. These are the things that you will say that you can say to your doctor, right, to get the appropriate treatment. Whether for you that is therapy, whether for you that is SSRIs, whether for you that is just coping mechanisms to avoid triggers. These are all things that you can do, and a couple of these things you can do without actually seeing a doctor at all, right? And again, if you're going to sort of self-help groups and looking at peer support from other people that also have maladaptive daydreaming, be very careful, because these people are experts in their own experience, but that doesn't mean they're experts in anything else. People know how they feel, people know what helps them, but that doesn't mean that what helps them is safe, healthy, or is going to help you at all, right? So bear all of this in mind. Be very careful, and yeah, just, I don't know, sort of try and not build, I obviously if you're doing something for so long, but try and not build an identity out of this, and try and maybe view it as more of an addiction rather than something that you're hardwired to do.
Who you are.
Yeah. That was Maladaptive Daydreaming.
Hey, wow,
good.
Corey, what a monster episode that was. Well done.
Whew. Do you guys want to do a quick fire quiz?
Yeah.
Why not? Dun 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 dun. Daydreaming edition.
So, the rules for the quick fire quiz are the same as always. I will ask one question between the two of you. You have to answer the question first after buzzing in, after I have finished asking the question. The rules are confusing. That doesn't matter. They're the same every week. You should know them by now. Look, what is your buzzer?
Ow.
Okay, good. Jam,
What was that for?
There's nothing, you can't make any sounds based on maladaptive daydreaming, so I just went with a noise.
Oh,
Jam, what's your buzzer?
which is the dreaming part of
Okay.
daydreaming.
But you can dream while walking around and not sleeping.
He's just using a little
Just
dream.
the dreaming
He's
part.
using his imagination.
What's
Yeah.
that?
Very good. So my question for you is, what is the first name of the person who has done all of these maladaptive daydreaming studies? Second name, Summer. Jamp.
Oh no, I can't remember that.
Bow.
Luke.
The letter E.
That's close.
You only
Jam-
said the name
I
once.
thought Summer was the first
I
name.
said it
I'm going to
a
be
number of
honest.
times. You can, yeah. E is right. If you add on 2 letters, you can win.
Bow.
I.
Bow.
Luke.
Eli.
Yeah.
Yeah!
You added on 1 letter. 1 letter. Congratulations, Luke. You won.
Thank you very
Not
much.
if it's spelled EYE. That's the
Very good. Luke, you have won this week's quickfire quiz. What did he win, Jamp?
Nothing.
Okay.
Sorry.
But it is time to thank our patrons, because this is a patron episode that we have been suggested by our patrons. So let's quickly run through the patrons to thank. Boy, this was a whole lot, wasn't it?
Hell yeah, good month.
So, Luke, do you want to give us a little start there?
Thank you very much to Cody.
Thank you to Teresa Rosenkova.
Thank you to Brad the Music Duck.
Thank you, Lily Starkey.
Thank you to I probably can't use the name I want here.
Thank you to Viola Borg.
Thank you to not Ethan. If
Thank
you're
you.
not called Ethan, thank you very much.
Thank you to Taylor Mulholland.
Thank you to Abby.
Thank you, Teresa McNish. What are you laughing at?
Why are you giving me? Oh my god! Why have I got this name?
Oh, sorry. He's not laughing at Teresa McNish. He's laughing at the fact that the next name is in a bunch of what look like Slavic characters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You're gonna have to go to the YouTube video if you're listening to audio. I'm gonna put your name on screen. Thank you.
It looks like
There you
Nen
That is-
Bmemb.
Those characters make entirely
I
different
know, but I'm going
sounds.
to try and read it. Kutapak the
John Smith. I'll go with that.
Thank you, Alex Huffman.
Thank you, Tan.
Thank you, Dan Oblivion.
Thank you, Lauren Boyan.
And thank you to God Hates Beth.
Fantastic.
Oh, sorry,
Great
Beth.
patrons this
Sorry
month.
to hear that, Beth.
If you want to become a patron, you can head to patreon.com/SciGuys and join up. There are lots of different things you can do. You can become a patron where you can suggest an episode topic, you can vote on episode topics, and you can even submit an episode topic for us to do, and we have to do it. We have to do the topic. If you want to do a topic, you can head to our patreon.com/SciGuys and make us do whatever topic you want.
That is a thing you can do.
You can
You
do
can
that.
do that. And I think that's it. Have we got anything else we want to say?
No.
No.
Good.
Goodbye.
No. Before we go, we would like to thank all of our patrons with a very special thanks to executive producers Ashley Muller and Finn TZ. And also, thank you for watching. You can find the full references to this episode in the description. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday, and why not leave us a nice wee comment? You can support the pod at patreon.com/SciGuys or find and contact us at SciGuysPod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and SciGuys on TikTok too.
And YouTube. Oh, we're on YouTube. Sorry.
Or you can send us an email at SciGuysPod@gmail.com.
SciGuysPod@gmail.com.
SciGuysPod.
At gmail.com, you can follow me at NotCorey everywhere.
Follow me at Jampkin everywhere.
You can follow me at Luke Cutforth everywhere.
And goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.